Let's see. So I have a couple people I want to introduce you all to before we get started today. Sarah Foster is with the Future Ready Oregon team and will be helping to facilitate today's meeting. So you will see Sarah and I supporting each other in that. Additionally, since our last meeting, we have hired your manufacturing industry consortium policy analyst. You may recognize her because she was around the table the last time we met, but Dr. Carrie Weigel-Delaplane is going to be in your work going forward, and we could not be more excited. She's day 6, so I told her she could observe and not have to lead the function. Although she's fully capable, I thought I'd give her a pass on that one. I will in a moment turn it over to your executive leadership team to provide some opening remarks. But why don't we take a quick minute to just do a quick round of introductions. If you could just say your name, organization, and your title, that would be great. And Dave, we'll start with you.
All right, I'm Dave Dillon with Food Northwest, which is a trade association for food makers.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Eric Anderson, the president of SEDCOR, the Strategic Economic Development Corporation, a three-county economic development organization, Mary Fulton Yemen.
My name is John Wurst. I'm a mechatronics teacher at Forest Grove High School.
Good morning, Claudia Rizzo, Youth Apprenticeship Project Manager for the Hillsborough School District. And I do have a message from our superintendent, Travis. He sends his regrets. We had a student passing over the weekend, so he's supporting the schools and the community today.
Thank you so much.
Kathy Bishop, Human Resources Director with Gyros, and I get that.
I'm Paul Sheldon. I'm the Senior Development Director at Golden Rule Reentry in Medford.
I'm Abigail Lewis, founder and executive director of Golden Rule Reentry in Medford.
Dan Finley, Education Specialist, Oregon Department of Education.
Todd Nell, Director of the Workforce and Talent Development Board. I'm going to be sharing with Craig a little bit about the Workforce and Talent Development Board with you all today.
And I'm Craig Campbell. I'm the executive director here at OMIC R&D. Welcome, everybody.
Sage Learn, I'm the Chief of Staff and Executive Director of College Relations for Portland Community College.
Christy Wilson, City of Hillsborough Workforce Development Manager.
Good morning. I'm Scott Bruin. I'm the VP of Government Affairs for OBI, Oregon Business and Industry.
I'm Mariah Robbins. Good morning, Vice President of Global People and Culture and Operations at ADEC. Hopefully the coolest thing made in Oregon.
Yes.
Deputy Director for Central. Good morning, Ed Pazer, Provost at Oregon State University.
Good morning, Benton Strong, Director of Government Affairs for Vigor.
Morning, everyone. Heather Dessart, Executive Director of Northwest Oregon Works. I'm here representing my local Workforce Development Board and OWP, the Oregon Workforce Partnership in its entirety. That's the association of the 9 local boards.
I'm Anna Brown. I'm the manager. I'm the Workforce Development Manager for the Port of Monroe.
Good morning, I'm Kyle Ritchie Noel and the Director of Education and Workforce Policy for the Oregon Business.
And I'm Arthur Chapper with Business Oregon, the State Economic Development Department. I'm a Regional Development Officer in the Advanced Manufacturing Team.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Trin Lee, and I'm with CDC. I'm a Workforce Development Program Manager. Our company is a nonprofit organization that help the BIPOC communities to get advanced in their life. And
I'm Kristen Lima. I'm the Dean of Applied Technologies, Business and Information Systems at Mount Hood Community College.
Hi, I'm Carly Petrovic. I'm the Senior Human Resources Manager for Microchip Technology in Gresham.
Morning, I'm Jenny Levy. I'm the Senior Leader for Training, including apprenticeship as a Baldwin Portland.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Well, with that, I will turn it over to Ed, Jonath, Mariah, and Scott for some opening remarks about our work here today.
Awesome, thank you. Welcome, everyone. We have taken an approach that we're going to each of us take turns kind of consolidating because we have a lot of similar things to say. So you don't have to hear 4 repeats of the same opening remarks each meeting. So this time it's my turn to kick us off. Really what we're here today to do, we had so many wonderful ideas floating around the room last time, and it was a great introductory opportunity to hear a lot about what's going on, a lot about the industry, a lot of big macro and even some micro trends and things that are happening in communities. So today and moving forward, we're working really to gain a way to get consensus on both our short-term and long-term objectives so that as a group, we can be really effective, right? We don't want to boil the ocean with this group and try to do everything, but if we can take a couple focused efforts forward and decide where we think this grant money should really be, advising where we think that the biggest investments should go, as well as really making sure that we're taking all of these great diverse perspectives around the room and moving forward with some really good recommendations. So today we'll be diving a little bit deeper into some of the economic data as a reminder, some of the things that are happening with workforce, and an opportunity for us to really hear and then have some more conversations around some direction. But the hope today is that we leave with a little bit more of kind of, I think about this like as a funnel. We had a lot of information, and as we're kind of going through this process, getting a little bit more focused so that we can have that consolidated effort and really make an impact. So very excited for all of us to be here today. And I joked at the beginning, my assistant is not from Oregon. We were going over my schedule for this week, and she's like, do you want me to book you a flight for Monday? And I'm like, wait, where am I going on Monday? It's not that long. Everybody maybe the trek here. I know my drive wasn't as far as some. So with that, anything that I left off? Great. Thank you.
Great. So as Jennifer said earlier, I'm going to be helping facilitate this meeting today. So I am actually the healthcare industry consortia lead. So I'm just so appreciative of the energy you're bringing to the faith on a Monday. It feels very zen. It's very zen. So just appreciate that. So I'm going to walk you through the agenda before then I hand it back over to Jennifer, but we do have some time certain items. So we might have to just take a quick break before we get to the 10:30 public comment spot. But today is your first quarterly meeting, so congratulations to getting this far in your journey. We are going to really spend some time reviewing your charter. So you have a copy of that in your folder of just your purpose, your short and medium term objectives and membership, and kind of walking through that. Then we're going to introduce Todd and Craig, who I met this morning, to go a little into the Workforce and Talent Development Board, because this group is advisory of the Workforce and Talent Development Board, and especially as you get into your medium-term objective space, you're really going to want to start to think about what that looks like. So getting some level set information on the Workforce and Talent Development Board. Then I'm going to introduce the HEC's DEI director, who's going to go over some equity foundations and group agreements. So really thinking about how the HEC equity lens fits into the work of this consortium. We're going to take a break. Then we're going to have a wonderful facilitated panel on folks that are really boots on the ground doing this work in their communities. Then we'll take another break. I think we have lunch sometime in there, so you will eat, I promise. I will not adjourn at 3 p.m. without folks having carbohydrates, but then we're going to do a little data refresher on Oregon's manufacturing workforce. And then the rest of the day is going to be on our short-term objectives, which are advising future rounds of workforce ready grant funding. So I'm going to walk you through some guiding principles around seeking consensus in this space in particular. And then we're going to go into some breakout groups to start to unpack the information from the morning and identify gaps and opportunities. We'll do some report outs, and that will feed into our wrap up and next steps before we adjourn for sounds like there are 2 tours. So that's amazing. 2 tours. My guess is we might end a little early so we can get to the tours earlier. This was my shortest commute. I live in St. John's, so I'm just like really excited to be in this space because I typically go to Salem and that's a long way. So I was happy to jump in this facilitator role and come up to Scappoose. It's a beautiful space, so thank you for allowing us to share it with you. So we're going to maybe go into approval of meeting minutes and then take a little bit of a break before we do have a time certain agenda item, which is public comment, unless there was no public comment submitted.
There's no public comments.
Then I think we can go into the meeting
Well,
minutes?
let's go ahead and do the
Yeah.
minutes.
So you have the meeting minutes from the first kickoff meeting in your packets. So we just need to get a motion to approve those meeting minutes from someone in the group.
Can I ask for
Yeah.
one edit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As much as I love the ducks, you have me listed at University. of
No.
That's all. I don't, you're probably just.
I feel like we all need a moment of silence right now.
Maybe you knew something I didn't.
No, okay.
Not
no,
amazing. Adjustment. I feel like we need now to review the minutes. Are there any other changes to the minutes? Other than that change?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you.
Great.
So can we?
I think we can go ahead and start and then pause to just check in, yeah.
So I'm gonna bring Jennifer back to the floor to go over to start the reviewing the manufacturing industry consortium charter. We will take a break at 10:30 just to make sure that anyone that has submitted opportunity for public comment is able to do that.
Still not, okay, all right. Well, I do want to draw your attention to some of the items in your packet. You should have the agenda for today, the draft minutes from our kickoff meeting, as well as a membership list. If y'all could review that just for accuracy, make sure that you and your organization are properly represented. Are you on that? You're not, okay, so we'll make sure and update that. And let us know if there are any edits to the membership list. And then you also have a copy of the draft charter. We'll walk through today a little bit more about what the Future Ready Oregon statute says about the role and responsibilities of the industry consortia to make that a little more clear. But if you have not had a chance to review the charter, we would ask that you do that in addition to the work that we'll be doing today to walk through the roles and responsibilities of this group. So my presentation is going to walk through that in summary and bring your attention to a couple of highlights, but would ask that you review the charter in more detail if you haven't already done so. Ronan, will you just grab my attention at 10:30 so we can just double check for public comment, but I'm assuming everyone would like to just keep moving rather than taking a break. Okay, perfect. So next slide, please. So a little bit, and you should also have in your packet a copy of the full slide deck from today. So you'll have that for reference. And then we will post, we'll always post the meeting materials to the website so that you have access to that and follow up as well. Senate Bill 1545 that passed in 2022 is the legislation that informs our work for Future Ready Oregon. And I just wanted to draw your attention to, I feel like I may be in your way, so I'm going to stand over here. Draw your attention to the roles and responsibilities of the industry consortium as established in the statute. The purpose of the consortium as a piece of the Future Ready Oregon puzzle is really to establish strategic partnerships. It's the work of the consortium, healthcare, manufacturing, and technology that are intended to advance systems alignment between education, industry, and community partners. And you'll see that theme throughout our work today. But really, this is a space where we're establishing strategic partnerships to align workforce development activities specifically around the statewide manufacturing workforce needs in Oregon, aiming to increase participation in workforce programs by individuals from priority populations. We've identified those for you, but as a reminder, this is my test, they include people of color, women, veterans, individuals with disabilities, individuals from rural and frontier communities, individuals who identify as members of the LGBTQ plus community. Older Oregonians, I'm missing 3.
Formerly incarcerated.
Incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals. I should have made this a test for you all. I'm missing 2. Did I said individuals with disabilities?
Yes.
Native American.
Members of Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes. It's on a slide, I promise, but I'm gonna feel horrible when I realize what the 10th one is. We will also be focusing on identifying mutual goals and industry-specific workforce needs across the state. I think it's also really important to talk about the iterative nature. Heather Dessart introduced herself as a representative of the 9 local workforce development boards in Oregon. Their work very similarly convenes business and industry and education and other workforce service partners at a local or regional level. This group is intended to think statewide, and that iterative process of informing regional work as well as regional work informing our work at the statewide level is really important to the work that we're doing. Over our time, we'll be identifying high-value credentials, better understanding short-term pathways to employment in manufacturing, opportunities for career advancement within manufacturing, better understanding the landscape of manufacturing in Oregon. It's very diverse, and understanding the different occupation families and the different types of manufacturing, and where there are commonalities around workforce needs and where there maybe are unique opportunities. We'll be talking about recruitment strategies, opportunities to recruit individuals into occupations in manufacturing, as well as retention strategies and advancement strategies, and identifying and creating strategies to overcome barriers to participation and advancement within the manufacturing sector. I'm guessing we're right about 10:30.
I still have 6 minutes.
I'm talking too fast. Okay, so let's keep going. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the industry consortium. We think about this group and your partners in healthcare and technology as spaces to encourage innovation and new ways of working together. Thinking about shared leadership and creating a space where we're all equal partners in this conversation of understanding workforce needs and developing strategies. These are forums to identify ways that industry can innovate and implement workforce and talent development opportunities that align with economic strategies. And when we think about on a statewide level, the legislature included healthcare, manufacturing, and technology as priority sectors in the Future Ready Oregon legislation because they are important to our statewide economy. They're also sectors that have unique workforce needs and provide opportunities for short-term pathways to employment in communities all over the state, as well as advancement opportunities for upward economic mobility. The industry consortium are a mechanism for coordinating action and implementation, again, with that shared partnership model of public, private, and community-based partners, identifying issues and opportunities, curating resources, and understanding investments that will address some of our most complex talent development challenges in Oregon. And then the consortium are a vehicle for developing and demonstrating a shared commitment to diversity and inclusion in talent development practices and investments that support the equitable recruitment, retention, and career advancement strategies, again, in manufacturing. Next slide, please. A little bit about our structure, and this is detailed further in the charter in your packet, but certainly we have the Future Ready Oregon team from the HEC supporting your work. We are also partnering with Oregon Consensus out of the National Policy Consensus Center at Portland State University. You all had the opportunity to meet Turner Odell at our kickoff meeting, who is helping with the facilitation. He's unable to be here today. And so thanks to Sarah for stepping in and helping fulfill that role. But they are helping to facilitate this group towards your first set of recommendations. So they've been supporting the work in standing up the consortium. And then you'll have the Future Ready Oregon staff and your fantastic new policy advisors supporting your work going forward. We have your executive leadership team who you've met again this morning, and then all of you as consortium members. And then we've talked about in your charter, a couple of working groups are identified explicitly around better understanding equity and diversity strategies that advance the recruitment, retention, and provide for career advancement opportunities of a more diverse workforce in manufacturing. And then a working group that will look at integrating education and training pathways, helping to better understand what are the talent needs of the manufacturing sector in Oregon, and how is the education community responding, and where might there be gaps and opportunities to address. So these are the standing working groups that we expect to convene in the kickoff meeting. You all started those conversations. We also have the ability to set up agile working groups in response to the needs of this consortium. So if you as members identify additional information or something that a small group could work together to advance more quickly to then inform your work as a full consortium, we have a lot of flexibility around that, but this has sort of been the recommended framework for getting started. So we'll talk a little bit more about that today, and we anticipate convening the working groups between now and your next quarterly meeting to do a little bit of a deeper dive into your work. Next slide, please. Are we at 10:30 yet?
10:29.
All right. Okay, I can get through the membership slide. So this again is also detailed in your charter and in the statute. Consortium members, again, I mentioned that shared leadership model. The intention here is that the consortium brings together diverse perspectives and representation from manufacturing industry leaders and employers, community-based organizations that are working to provide workforce development services for the communities that they serve, as well as educational institutions and training providers and labor representatives. In addition, you'll see here some of the legislatively mandated partners that are included. We have representatives from the state Workforce and Talent Development Board. You'll be hearing from those folks a little bit later. Members of the Governor's Racial Justice Council, and then economic development partners, in addition to some of the others that we mentioned. This is not in statute, but we have said in order to sort of keep this manageable, 45 feels like the maximum. And so as we were thinking about membership, ensuring that we had a balance between representing the industry, education, and community was really, really important to us. Okay, it's got to be 10:30. Okay, we're going to pause there. Do we have anyone signed up to provide public comment?
We do not.
All right, anyone in the room that wanted to provide public comment?
Not really, but you need to make an announcement. You'll be seeing flashes going on here. That's our artist who's come in for the first time to see her piece of art. And so she's taking pictures out there. That's why.
That's fantastic.
They're flashing behind us.
That's fantastic. That's a great opportunity again to say how fantastic this facility is.
I'll just interrupt everything every 5 minutes.
Excellent. Okay, next slide, please. A little bit about our timeline and the deliverables. So it was mentioned earlier, the industry consortium are designed as advisory to the state's Workforce and Talent Development Board. You'll be hearing from Todd here in a little bit this morning, a little bit more about what is the state's Workforce and Talent Development Board. It's maybe the first time some of you have heard of that. But the industry consortium are really designed to be, again, a statewide lens on sector-specific workforce needs that can be advisory to the work of the Workforce and Talent Development Board. We also have some of our own charges in the short term and midterm. So I want to draw your attention to those. In the short term, which is really over the next 6 months or so, you all will be informing the next round of Workforce Ready grant funding, which is one of the grant funding mechanisms in the Future Ready Oregon legislation. We'll be talking about that a little bit more detail this afternoon. But the intention is that by early 2024, you all will be informing some criteria for a manufacturing specific grant opportunity, again, around recruitment, retention, and career advancement in the manufacturing sector in Oregon. This is part of the work that the Oregon Consensus team will be helping us facilitate towards. Then as we think beyond early 2024 and we move into that sort of medium term, this is really a space where you all will be thinking strategically about policy and funding recommendations, identifying systems barriers, gaps, or opportunities, and informing whether those are policy solutions, funding solutions, and that work, again, moving into 2024 and beyond. Longer term, our work will really inform what our priorities are. So as we better understand what are the workforce needs, the skills, high-value credentials of our manufacturing employers, what are our education and training assets across the landscape, where are their gaps? That will really inform how we dig deeper, what sort of data do we need to inform our decisions, et cetera. You'll hear a data refresher from Gail Krimenauer from the Employment Department a little bit later today about the statewide workforce for manufacturing. And by the end of today, we'll be asking you to be thinking about what additional information do you need to support your decision-making as we move through the next few months. Next slide, please. All right, decision-making and accountability. You'll see, again, some of this in the charter, and this group will really be moving today through some of the ways to think about consensus building, and we will need to come to some decision about how you all will reach decisions. We're not going to do that today, but we'll start to inform what your options are. Again, you are advisory to the Workforce and Talent Development Board and HEC staff, and really working to inform alignment between the consortium on sector-specific strategies, the Workforce and Talent Development Board, the HEC writ large, and the governor's office. All right, next slide, please. I also just want to draw your attention at the very end of your charter is a statement about conflict of interest. Serving on this consortium does not preclude you or your organization from eligibility for Workforce Ready grants or other Future Ready Oregon grant funding. We'll talk a little bit more about eligibility and how that's already outlined in the statute later this afternoon, but you all will be informing the criteria, but you will not be making funding decisions. So just want to reaffirm that there is not a conflict of interest for your participation here with us today. So I'll pause there. Are there questions about the charter and our purpose?
Can you do a little more detail about how the funding decisions will be made? We're advisory, and then what happens?
It's a great question, and we'll dive into this a little bit more this afternoon. But typically for the Workforce Ready grants, there is criteria that is built into the statute that's sort of like, this is our foundation. You will inform additional criteria. We'll walk through what that might look like this afternoon. And then we just issued award notices for a second round of Workforce Ready grants that were broad across healthcare, manufacturing, and technology. And what that process looks like is once applications have been received and that request for applications period closes, we train a cadre of community volunteers. This time around, there were about 60 volunteers from across the state that reviewed and scored the applications based on those criteria. And then we took the highest scoring applications and applied the statutory requirements to the review before the staff made funding recommendations. Yeah. All right, other questions? Okay, super. Well, I'm going to, I think now turn it over to Todd and Craig, who are going to tell you a little bit more about the state's Workforce and Talent Development Board, their work, and how we can fit into that work going forward. Are you going to do that? You're going to do that from there?
Yeah, is that all right?
That's fine.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you all for being here. Again, my name is Todd Nell. I'm the director of the Workforce and Talent Development Board, and I'm excited to be here with my friend, colleague, and WTB Workforce and Talent Development Board member, Craig Campbell. Thank you for hosting. You posted so many events here that I've had the pleasure to attend, and I really appreciate that and all the work that your staff does. And thank you to all of you for your commitment to this work and your leadership around the manufacturing sector. So again, you'll notice Travis was in the mix to present with us today, and unfortunately he texted me last night and said he had a pressing emergency, and he sends his regrets. And wanted you all know that he has a lot of enthusiasm for the work and looks forward to working with all of us as we move forward. So harking back to what Jennifer said earlier, we're going to be sharing a little bit about the details around the why, the what, and how of the WTDB, and then talk a little bit about some of our plan. So I'll jump into some details here. The Workforce and Innovation Opportunity Act of 2014 is a federal law that seeks to align numerous programs. They're very complex. There's 14 of them that receive federal funding for workforce development efforts in our state and all of the other states across the country. These programs are collectively known as WorkSource Oregon, which many of you may be familiar with. And it provides employment, education, and training services for both the supply and the demand side, the job seekers and the employers. Under the act, the governor is responsible for that WSO system and fulfills that responsibility through the state workforce board and state agencies who receive and pass through oftentimes that federal funding out to folks like local workforce boards, for example. All governors are required to establish a state workforce board to carry out the function described in the law. And the governor or her designee is required to be a member of the Workforce and Talent Development Board. This go around, we are excited to have the economic development voice at the table along with the workforce, because as many of us say, workforce is economic development, and economic development is all about workforce. With Vince Porter on the WTDB. The governor also has to submit for approval to the U.S. Department of Labor a state workforce plan that's developed vis-a-vis engagement collaboration with approximately 20 partners, including the local boards, which Craig's going to talk about here in just a second. This combined plan, which we're in the midst of right now, and is due in March, I think, of 2024 for the 90-day review, and then submitted and approved by DOL in June. Every 4 years, and there's a midpoint modification at 2 years to make sure that we're tracking and staying on top of needs and issues. So it gives us opportunity to, tweak it based on that. It's an important part of our work also is the WTDB strategic plan, which Craig has helped us on. A number of folks maybe in this room, maybe not this table, maybe back there and out there, have also provided input into, including Travis. And it's kind of the North Star for the State Workforce Board as a leader in the system that really looks at the entire workforce system It's a pretty big umbrella that includes that WorkSource Oregon or public workforce system sort of pillar, but also other important partners like K-12, like the university system. So that it's much more comprehensive with the goal, for the state board, as called out in the legislation of really focusing on systems alignment and continuous improvement, which you'll also hear a little bit more about later. The governor is required to designate local workforce development areas through consultation with the state board, local chief elected officials, which are usually the county commissioners here in our state, and the local workforce boards. There are 9 of those workforce boards in Oregon, and they're certified every 2 years. So a little bit more about the local workforce board, I'll pass it over to Craig.
Great. So while the Workforce and Talent Development Board has discussions that are predominantly statewide, it's really important to maintain a level of local flavor and understanding of what's going on in different regions of the state. And as a result of that, there are 9 local workforce development boards. As an example, the Northwest Oregon Works, which is headed up by Heather Sark, is our local partner. So we engage her when we're talking about workforce issues. They also develop a workforce plan that ends up moving up to the state as part of the state planning process. But what's really important about those local workforce bodies is that they represent over 200 people throughout the state. They include elected officials, they include business folks, they include folks who are involved in education, and also people who do actual on-the-ground workforce work. So it's really critical for the work that we do as a system to have that local presence that understands what the local businesses need, what the local educators and workforce providers are able to do where they need assistance, where they need resources. So they really are kind of the hands-on local flavor for the system as a whole.
Great. Thanks, Craig. Next slide, please. So the charge of the WTDB is, again, to advise and assist the governor's office and the legislature on strategies, planning, policy, as it relates to many areas, including continuous improvement, that systems alignment that I talked about a few minutes ago, and that entire workforce system, which includes K-12, STEM, CTE, post-secondary, tech dev, and many others. The WTB is made up of leaders representing business. As a matter of fact, we're required, as are the local boards, per federal law, to have a minimum of 51% of the membership, which is now at a little over 40, I think, be represented by business with intentional thinking and strategy around making sure that the key sectors represented, or key sectors in our state, are represented on the state board. We're also required to have community-based organizations, the legislature, a couple of county commissioners, of course, the state agencies and local workforce boards, and other partners, as is uniquely positioned as Oregon's workforce and talent development expert, the board that is. We just talked about the membership and its diversity. Oh, another thing Craig and I wanted to talk a little bit about was a sort of framework that the state board adopted in 2017 from a document that was produced by the National Governors Association. And that framework is around high-performing workforce boards. The document itself, you can look it up, building a high-performing state workforce board, outlines key strategies that governors can focus on to align state education, post-secondary, as well as that entire workforce system to meet the needs of business and connected individuals around jobs, training, and education. We also have a role in Future Ready Oregon with Prosperity 10,000 and, of course, the 3 consortia, in addition to this one, healthcare and technology. So next slide, please. So let's move into some of the priorities of the WTDB. I spoke a little bit about the strategic plan. We'll show it to you in here just a second. We also have a few committees of the WTDB. One is affectionately known as the KIC, the Continuous Improvement Committee. Another, the Workforce Readiness Committee. course, there's the future ready piece to our work as you all are advisory to the WTDB. And then a newer one that's still in play in terms of standing up as a legislative opportunities committee. Next slide, please. So I'll make this short and sweet because that's sort of the theme of our strategic plan. It used to be very long and now it's virtually just a page. So you can see maybe our vision, maybe not. So I'll just say it. It depends on your vision. Mine not so well. Maybe you can see it, yeah, but I can. So the vision for this state workforce board is equitable prosperity for all Oregonians, and it's driven by a mission of advancing Oregon through education, training, jobs, and careers by empowering people and employers. If you take a look at this, again, it is short and sweet. Next slide, please. You can see how we've broken it down by 3 columns of 4 imperatives, which align with objectives and initiatives to achieve the objectives to carry out on those imperatives. I won't get into the details, but I encourage you to take a look at those and better understand that sort of connectivity between this entity and the state workforce. So with that, I think we had to change this up a little bit since Travis wasn't joining us, but it is time to turn it back over to me.
Okay. Forgive me for a short story first. There was a little girl who was watching her father prepare the turkey for Thanksgiving. And as he was doing so, he cut the front and the back off of the turkey. And she said, "Dad, why did you cut the front and the back off the turkey?" So, well, that's the way Grandma used to do it. So, why? So Dad said, "Well, why don't we call Grandma?" Yeah. So they called Grandma and said, "Grandma, why did you cut the front and the back off the turkey when you were preparing the turkey for Thanksgiving?" She said, "Well, that's the way Great Grandpa used to do it." Yeah. Why? Well, I don't know. Let's call Great Grandpa. So they called Great Grandpa and says, "Great Grandpa, why is it that you cut the front and the back off the turkey?" And he said, "Well, that's because the pop's too small." Continuous Improvement Committee is designed to prevent that from ever happening in the work that we're doing around workforce. It should never be, well, this was the system we created, and therefore by being a system, it must always work. So when they passed Senate Bill 623 back in 2021, we were charged to create a committee that would continue to evaluate Source Oregon and make sure it's actually doing what it's supposed to, and also look at where it can improve what we're doing. So good enough isn't just good enough. And that means looking at the local level and finding out what are they doing in this area. Is this something that can be adopted in policy? So that group is designed to take that information constantly, make sure that we're doing what we're doing as best we can, and then put that in the hands of the people who can make changes to that, which is essentially the governor and the legislative body. So the Continuous Improvement Committee, that is their role. And my experience has not been that that's a pretty standard practice for most government entities who are responsible for implementing programs. And usually what happens is every few years, the legislature comes back, looks at a program, and then changes it according to the way they're currently looking at things. So this is a much more intentional approach. Did I miss anything?
I think you did great. Next slide, please, and you're still up, I think.
So I am. So this is the Workforce Readiness Committee. This is the one that is looking at essential employability skills. I mean, whether you're looking at manufacturing, you're working in technology, or you're looking at it's medical services, healthcare. Thank you. Looking at the healthcare system, there's some things that stand out that are needed statewide but may not be present. It's the one thing that everyone thinks somebody else is responsible for, and that is those essential employability skills. You might think of them as either human skills or soft skills, but essentially finding out where there are models that actually work, and then finding a way to make sure that what makes them work is available to everyone else. So that when young people move up, or people coming out of an incarcerated setting, or those who are transitioning from another industry, have those things that employers in general really need to make sure are in place to best employ those employees and whatever their particular need is. And so this particular group has developed a series of reports, the Oregon Talent Assessment, the Self-Sufficiency Standard for Oregon, the effects of the pandemic on Oregon's healthcare workforce, and the talent development for artificial intelligence in a post-pandemic world. So it's a group that has done a lot of nitty-gritty work, calling on experts and those who are actually doing this stuff in the field to gather that information so that we can make use of it as broadly as possible. Because none of this does any good if it's just held in a report.
Great, I'll just add, thank you, Craig. A couple of things. In 2020, what was then the Essential Employability Skills Task Force, which has morphed into, to give us broader scope around workforce readiness, the Workforce Readiness Committee, in 2020 during the pandemic produced its first report called Essential Employability Skills, think human skills, soft skills, needed now more than ever, which was very well received by the governor's office and by the legislature, not to mention many partners, and on a national scene for its efforts. And so we're in the midst of another report right now being produced around work readiness, so a little bit broader, that will include the essential employability skills work as it evolves. There's a lot of passion around this committee. Travis is really excited about it. And I got to say, I think it's at least in my tenure, I've been at the agency back when it was CCW, Community Colleges and Workforce Development, before it became the HAC.
Back in the day.
Back in the day. And I think this committee has really created a table and space that's allowed probably the best engagement that we've ever had between the Department of Education and the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. So a lot of energy, a lot of passion, and Travis really wanted to talk about this. Again, he sends his regrets for not being here, but asked me to carry the water a little bit for him. So he wanted to talk about his passion for K-12 and its critical importance in workforce and talent development. He also wanted to note that it's called out in that strategic plan that we flashed up there that you couldn't see. But please, I would encourage you to go and take a look at it. Because for the first time ever, there's some critical components of K-12 that are called out. He wanted to mention how important he thinks sector-specific ecosystems are. Particularly, he has done some great work with Christy out in Hillsborough around youth registered apprenticeships, and is a big component of registered apprenticeships writ large.
Would it be possible to make a recommendation that the governance assessment as well as the employability skills report are circulated to this group? Because I think that both of those are going to make really, the first one around the CIC, I think is really going to inform the DEI group that's going to be focused, and the second one I think is going to help with education and training. And I just want to make a point that is, I think across the board, it's critically important that we're constantly looking at building upon, not recreating, because we could spend all day in a session here brainstorming those skills. And rather than do that, we should be looking at what are the skills and what are the 3 or 4 that are the most important to us to advancing this, because I just don't want us to continually be doing the same work that's already been done.
Yeah, great point. Happy to send that out to everyone.
Thank you.
And if I can make one mention about the work that Christy and Travis have been doing. We've actually been kind of watching, because the youth apprenticeship program that you're doing for the first time reflects a true competency-based approach. And that's going to be fairly important as we start stretching, and we're working with PCC to develop the first ever additive manufacturing apprenticeship. There are no people that can act as journeyman for those apprentices. So essentially, the idea of demonstrating competency versus time served is a discussion that is, the time sort of has come. So the fact that you jumped into that space, we don't plan on just watching vicariously through you, but it's things like that that allows us to spark a conversation that has much greater import statewide and across multiple.
Can I add something to that real quick, just throwing it out, just based on that, we are making trying to get a legislative ask to change the statute for youth apprenticeships, so we'll be looking for support around that so that we can, for youth apprenticeships to have a competency-based model. So we need to change that.
And I should point out, sorry, we don't cite that, but right now, Foley has a competency-based apprenticeship program, but it's actually a time served or kind of traditional approach with competency elements on top. And what I think you're talking about doing, except what I'm hoping, is that it's truly, if you can demonstrate competency, then you don't have to continue to spend the time going through an apprenticeship program for that check off.
Great. Just one more thing that Travis asked us to mention. Every 2 years, the WTDB sponsors and staffs a talent summit, which really takes a look at what is sort of found and recommended by a report that's kind of done in parallel with planning and research with the talent summit called the talent assessment. It looks at gaps and opportunities in workforce and talent development world that need to be addressed and provides potential solutions to meet those needs and issues. Well, the last one we had was in 2022. And with the help of Oregon Business Council, we were able to have a great keynote speaker come and speak with us, Bill Von Billion with MIT. And he wrote a book. We had the book available at the 2022 Talent Summit and had a few extra copies. Travis is a big fan of the book, and he asked me to bring some copies. So there are 2 boxes, some on the table back there of books. If you'd like to grab a copy, if you don't yet have one, I would encourage you to grab one. It's a pretty good read. Workforce Education, A New Roadmap by Bill Von Billion. So, okay, you can let Travis know.
Good job.
Okay, let's see. I think that's good for we're ready. As community. Next slide. Future Ready Oregon. The WTDB in conjunction with OBC, again, we're going to give you a little historical context as to kind of how some of us got here. In conjunction with the OBC played an important role in initial ideation and strategizing and innovation sort of behind Future Ready before it got into Jennifer's shop back during the pandemic through our 2020-2021 Equitable Prosperity Task Force. Members of that task force played a leadership role in advising and informing folks. In fact, the WTDB Equitable Prosperity Task Force members had some Richards with Rise Partnership, and our good friend and colleague who is now retired, but past president Mark Mitsui at PCC were instrumental in that task force, as well as on the workforce group of the Racial Justice Council, which did all the great work in sausage making of Future Ready Oregon. Under Future Ready, so shifting from that sort of history to sort of the role of the Workforce and Talent Development Board in consultation with the WTDB Continuous Improvement Committee, has 3 critical roles for that Prosperity 10,000 program, one of numerous within Future Ready. It oversees the progress of Prosperity 10,000, ensures that program goals are met, and last identifies areas for program improvement. The 10,000 or the Prosperity 10,000 program was designed to provide a series of workforce development opportunities and supports, especially for priority populations and through Oregon's 9 local workforce development boards. The overarching goal is to serve 10,000 individuals through improved capacity and responsiveness of the workforce Oregon system, really by helping with program navigation, access, the community-based career counseling and wraparound supports and services, and by providing opportunities to earn industry-recognized certificates, credentials, degrees through work-based learning experiences. So let's see, moving on to the WTDB's advisory role with the industry consortia. There are both talent development roles and system alignment roles. And another table that will help with that, we anticipate and provide important cross connectivity will be the Legislative Opportunities Committee. And With that, I'll pass it back over to you.
Excellent. Now, I should say that the Legislative Opportunities Committee the concept is there, but we're not quite sure exactly how it's going to roll out or when it's going to roll out. Perhaps even if it's going to roll out. But the idea is to have one place where all of the legislative initiatives that come through the three consortium have a place where there's somebody who's responsible for making sure they get drafted, making sure they get implemented, coordinating. And by the way, I should say that the fact that there's going to be a committee that's doing this in no way means that people around this table should not expect or hopefully engage in the discussion with the legislature about what is good for the state of Oregon in the legislative offerings that are put forward, both by yourselves and things that you might be encountering in the legislative process. But this group, this committee is designed to at least consolidate those things so that we have a consistent set of bills, whether they be policy bills or funding bills. It'll stretch beyond Future Ready Oregon, to be frank, because the needs will be beyond Future Ready Oregon. But it also will have the responsibility to see that once it gets passed, gets implemented and continues on. So it'll have a responsibility for essentially bird dogging the implementation as well. But part of that is also going to mean that this group and the two others will continue to have a feed into that, but also will be getting back stuff from this committee as to where assistance or guidance is going to be needed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great job. I guess I would just add that WTDB leadership approved the Legislative Opportunities Committee back in late spring, early summer, and it's currently a bit unclear, as Craig touched on, as to what it looks like going forward. And we're all sort of waiting for the governor's office to make some decisions on what that all looks like. But the original intent was to really sort of listen deeply to particularly the employers and business folks on the WTDB around having a space and clarity where they can come with their lens, their voice, and have, ideation sessions, strategy sessions as partners across the entire workforce system. So along with many of the sort of entities that are represented here and on the state board, local boards, really have space to conceive of and prioritize, brainstorm strategies that then could potentially find their way to the agencies, to the HEC, and onto the governor and legislature. So more to come on that. I think that pretty much concludes our presentation.
Todd, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
That's a concept right now, this legislative opportunities committee. It's not in place. It's something that we're striving for or heading towards.
Well, we actually have a charter almost finalized. We have members that have volunteered and committed. So it's all ready to go. It's just on pause pending further information and decisions from the government. Yeah. Any other questions at all?
That's so great. Thank you so much. And I think, I want to be really clear with you all that Future Ready Oregon and the development of the legislation, there was a vision for what this sort of ecosystem would look like. And you all are part of this sort of real-time realization. And as you can see from what Todd and Craig talked about, there's an evolution in the work of the WTDB, and there's going to be an evolution of our work. And some of that is just going to be iterative and evolving over time. So I want to name in this space that sometimes the answers to your questions will be, I don't know. The work itself will inform those next steps. But Todd and Craig, I appreciate the way that you identify where there are places where that work intersects. And this group, I think the intention is that we have, I think you attributed it to Travis, so I'll attribute it to Travis, but the sector-specific ecosystem where we really have the ability to dive deeply into what is best for Oregon's manufacturing sector in terms of workforce and talent development. So please do, if you have additional questions, ask, because while we may have answers, they also help inform our work going forward. I also just want to call out the work that Todd mentioned and the Hillsborough partnership. You all heard from some of those partners, Christy and Kathy and Travis at our last meeting, and Carrie. At our last meeting, and heard a little bit about, again, that very localized or regionalized workforce and talent development partnership that was happening. To me, this is a great example of there are things happening that make sense amongst localized partners around delivering recruitment and career advancement strategies. But there are barriers that they may encounter that require a statewide lens. And that may be a space where the consortium is interested in engaging. They've identified a barrier that affects them really specifically locally, but has much broader implications. And so that stood out to me as a great example of where that iterative partnership between local and statewide makes great sense. Excellent. Okay, with that, we are running very ahead of schedule. So we're going to give you all about a 10-minute coffee and personal needs break before we move into our next section of the agenda. So please help yourself to coffee at front, greet a new colleague, or say hello to someone you haven't seen in a while. Yeah.
Settled in your seat. Hi, Rudy Ann. It's trying to get Rudy Ann, you're not huge, so sometimes when I know I'm presenting over Zoom and I'm the whole screen, that makes me anxious. Smaller. There we go. So
I was gonna say, I'm okay if I'm small, it's all good.
So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Rudy Ann Rivera Lindstrom, who is the HEC's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility. I didn't get that during the agenda overview, correct? To walk us through the HEC Equity Lens. And in the charter, really, the HEC Equity Lens, it's very explicit that the HEC Equity Lens guides the work of this group. And so thought we would spend some time today having Rudy Ann walk through that with this group, and then we will have some time in small groups to do an exercise around reflecting on the presentation and reflecting on your work as a consortia and starting to elevate like how you think this will manifest in your work moving forward. So Rudy Ann, I'm going to hand it over to you to walk through the presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. Hopefully you all can hear me all right. I got a brand new work computer a couple weeks ago, and then my husband got me new headphones. So I'm hoping everybody can hear me all right.
We can, yes.
Awesome. Well, it is buenos dias, good morning. It is such a pleasure to be with you all today. Again, I apologize I can't be there in person with you all, but this is exciting work because I feel like we're on the home stretch as far as getting folks all on the same page of what we mean when we say, right? And so Sarah just mentioned this is, you know, at the HEC, especially with my role, my name is Rudy Ann Rivera Lindstrom, as she just stated, and I am a part of the HEC's executive team along with Jennifer Purcell in the executive director's office. And so part of my charge in my role is to support the operationalization of our equity commitment so that we move past just, you know, from the declaration to really keeping ourselves accountable to the purpose of a lot of the legislation and policies we get to work with. And so this one is becomes even more so important because, as you know, historically, this legislation was connected and came from the Governor's Racial Justice Council. And so it becomes even more there becomes more of a need of intentionality to incorporate first working definitions, recognizing that equity and DEIA in a lot of spaces can be very subjective, and the definition can shift based on needs and demographics of any given group. And so for us at HEC, it's important then for all of us to be on the same page of how we define equity and what we intentionally try to do in order to stay true to that. And so next slide, please, Ronan. So at the HEC, you know, we have both the long equity lens document, which is it's both the declaration and a tool for us. And so we were able to then separate our working definition from that through a stance, a one pager. But this is just a piece of that. So for us, post-secondary education equity will be achieved once one's community or characteristic, including but not limited to all the intersections of identity listed there, no longer predict inequitable access to and success in post-secondary education and training. So a lot of the time, you know, a lot of folks are saying this, we want to do this, but you know, we're trying to be intentional of our how more so in our work. And so we, by the creation of new tools that I'll show you in a few slides, just an example of one of them on how we're embedding and incorporating equity considerations all along the way so that it doesn't end up being an afterthought. We really try to be proactive. And I keep telling folks that I'm going to do this, either get posters or teachers, but we're not about doing checkity work here at the HEC. But how we try to do this and engage is in continuous learning, but really thinking through the root historical causes of systemic racism and inequities, and not just their manifestations. So it includes that intentional examination and elimination of policies and practice, attitudes, and cultural messages that tend to perpetuate the stark inequities in post-secondary education and workforce training that we see today. So a lot of the time in these initiatives, as you all know, it could be a lot about recruiting and creating these pathways, but where things get lost in translation is on that retention piece. And so if we're going to do this incredible lift to align to this particular legislation, part of the conversation for all of us has to be, well, how are we addressing culture, climate, and space in order to keep these amazing people successful once they land in the opportunities that they get. Next slide, please. So for us, that we have our own Oregon HEC equity lens. We updated it and adopted it back in 2021. A lot of folks don't know that the equity lens in education in particular was an actual document that was created back in 2011 through the Oregon Education Investment Board at the time. And it was an attempt and an effort to basically address racial disparity in education by creating, again, working definitions, questions for consideration as we think about resource allocation and policy development, all to center the folks that we're trying to support in the work, right? And so the purpose of any lens, and since then, different school districts and even corporations and agencies have developed their own version of this, as they should, because it isn't a one-size-fits-all. But it is important to have something in place that allows us to stay intentional, allows us to slow it down just enough so we can think through whether or not what we're doing is heading in the right direction, or if it is a good idea or not. And so its purpose always is to make intentional policies and investments and systemic change to achieve an equitable post-secondary education system and lay out and clearly state how we will maintain accountability to those structures. It confirms the importance of identifying and urgently addressing institutional and systemic barriers. And of course, it emphasizes historically marginalized and underserved students with a particular focus on racial equity. So like I said, for the HEC, we needed to evolve from the original document created back in 2011 and have one that better aligned to our Oregon strategic plan and our equity goals. And so the new document that's embedded in your folders or in a link, I don't remember how you have access to it right now, but represents that. And again, folks are able to use it and essentially make it their own, but we have more condensed versions of what the complete document is in order for us to do our work internally. Next slide. So again, at the HEC, we do have an Oregon strategic roadmap. It isn't necessarily the HEC's strategic roadmap. This is a document that was created with partners and feedback of the different institutions and community-based organizations and leaders in the field that really could capture in a full wraparound way what is needed in post-secondary education and training. And so the strategic roadmap itself is a separate document, which, I think it's this year or going into the next, we're going to be looking at revamping that and seeing what else is needed since the evolution of when it first started, and particularly because it was adopted right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so as we know, a lot of things have changed since then, but there are 5 specific goals. And at the HEC, we have 4 actual intentional equity goals that align to these 5 goals that address external pieces in regards to our role as a state agency in dismantling systemic barriers and identifying those things to support students and families and workers in our system. In addition to expanding our ability to authentically engage our partners in process as co-creators, as informers, as anything that is needed to move the work forward in meaningful ways. I was going to add to this, so you know, so how we maintain accountability internally to this is that for folks that don't know, at the HEC, we require all offices, all 8 offices in our agency to each have individual office equity action plans. They set goals based on the needs and the projects that they're working on, but they have to align back to this strategic plan and our goals, in addition to requiring staff to engage in different types of learning throughout the year that help support the work that they get to do, and create a stronger equity framework, in addition to just building fluency around the work that we do. Next slide. So a couple other ways that we frame how we approach policy work and thinking. And again, this all started back in 2020 when we realized definitely there was a need to better understand how to create policies that really support equity and not create systemic barriers. And so there's a new consideration on how we approach the work, and this work comes from John C. Powell on targeted universalism. And what that he calls it an equity 2.0 approach, where he's trying for folks to avoid doing one thing over another or an all or nothing approach, because we still keep missing the mark when we try to either go too universal in process or too targeted. So his argument is that if we create overarching policy goals that we would want, the idea then becomes that everybody in every community should be able to access what those goals are, but of course, in unique and culturally responsive ways. So I bring up the example, for instance, I am Latina, I am from Bayamón, Puerto Rico, and my lived experience as a Latina female in Oregon is very different, for instance, from a Latina female coming from migrant parents or first gen situation in Woodburn in that context. And so if we have an overarching goal, it's going to be important as we engage with the different communities to really recognize the differences and the assets that they all bring in order to best find ways that they can access the resources and the things we're trying to do. But basically, targeted universalism is a new way to successfully break through a binary of universal responses versus targeted solutions in these attempts to remedy the effects of inequity. Next slide, please. So I gave the example between universal or targeted. Traditionally, and this plays out in federal government law and policies, and sometimes in decisions or rules or practices that we begin in any organization. But what ends up happening for universal responses and statements, it's definitely a way of signaling the desire for a diverse and equitable society, but can strike people, especially people who've been oppressed for generations, as being too grand or ambitious without any direct way of helping those who are still being harmed. And so you can have this really, really great idea, which tends to happen at the state, right? We create these, we come up with these things, but we don't, because of time constraints, because of the where we fall or fail, I should say, is when we don't think it all the way through as far as thinking through unintended consequences on whether or not this is even working or how it really plays out in the field when we think through these ideas. So the engagement component is just really important in process to better inform what we're trying to do. So then on the flip side of that, you have the targeted policies that are more direct and localized, but then they often seek to meet the needs of a particular group. So then that in and of itself can be viewed from a zero-sum perspective and then causing hostility and resentment among other groups in process. Next slide, please. So the idea of this targeted universalism then is that it's an alternative framework to design policies and implementation strategies to achieve our goals. It is constantly sensitive to structural and cultural dynamics in ways that often elude both targeted and universal strategies. And so as we start thinking through the charge of what you all get to work through and recommend and advise on, it's keeping at the forefront always you know, how we reach these different communities, you know, in these spaces and in a lot of other spaces. I always hear, well, we can't find that we can't find the people. We don't know where to look. We don't know this, but you know, what I want to reiterate is that we have folks there. We are here, right? And so it's just about slowing it down enough to make those connections or reach out to the folks that know those connections and start incorporating things in process. Next slide, please. So as we're thinking about data, the other big piece is around data equity and data justice. So often, as you all know, you know, we end up looking at numbers and but you know, we know more so now than ever that the numbers don't always tell the full story of a situation. And so one of the ways to interrupt that is by incorporating the qualitative side of things, or those narratives, those individual stories that could better inform the data, the numbers that we do review and look at. And so this idea of street data comes from the K-12 world. This book was published, I think around 2020 also. But it really sets its framing on Indigenous ways of knowing and practice, so that recognizing that, again, the story of the individual, of the story of the situation really does enhance when we're looking at numbers or trying to make a decision based on those. So the incorporation of those narratives are just as important in supporting the work that we do. Next slide. So the goal always is to go from status quo to transformation. The system we work in continuously still to this day still prioritizes measurement and incremental improvement over learning and transformation. And a lot of the time, because of timelines, ends up being a shallow approach to the incorporation of student and community voices or worker voices in process. And it still very much tends to perpetuate tokenism and marginalization of the gifts and voices that all these folks can bring to process. And so what we're trying to do, and we're not perfect, we haven't figured it all out, but it's in taking these steps, it really does help. But we want to focus and work towards that transformational system. We want to authentically engage student and workforce voices throughout this process, value multiple ways of knowing and learning, see and understand community cultural wealth, and of course, build relationships and work towards that restoration and healing. That part becomes really, really important because as we start to connect with new groups and new folks, we have to be culturally aware or empathetic or know that in most cases, a lot of our communities, our underserved communities have been hurt in some way, right? And so many times, when we just jump into it and not recognize that there is a distrust and we have to build that and we have to work towards earning that trust and restoring at least these new relationships, that is equally as important in process as we move forward. Next slide, please. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is our equity impact protocol. So what we did with our equity lens, again, at the HEC, we now that I have a team of 3 within the executive director's office for all things DEIA, and we're able to create tools for our teams and our staff to incorporate in the creation of RFAs, RFPs, thinking through impact, equity impacts, racial impact analysis. And kind of think through, you know, what we're still missing. Are we heading in the right direction? And so what we did was create a shorter version or condense of a visual for folks to have. And most of our teams do use this. They put it up and they work it in their team time to think through these questions and have discussion as it relates to their process and to safeguard or create another layer of accountability to make sure that they're doing right by their work, right? And so this particular visual does come with a full-blown worksheet that can be used in different ways. We're currently, our latest tool is actually an engagement toolkit where right now all our offices are undergoing an engagement assessment. Our executive director really wanted to know where our readiness was. And so we're almost done with that. And my hope is that once we have a better gauge on how we're connecting with folks, who's still missing in process, and will help inform to our strategic planning moving forward. And so this is again just another example of something you all could use in process, and then collectively also decide when to do that. Next slide. So as you think about this, like I said, a lot of this content, this is just a very high overview of just the working premise of what we ground ourselves in our work. You all get to think about now, as it relates to manufacturing and all the things and all the passion that you're bringing to this, to participating in this process, how are we authentically centering adult students and workers in this work? What is the role of leadership and workforce partners in supporting workforce culture, climate, and the equity work? And then consider what is missing from Oregon's current system. So those are just some leading questions as you go into your breakouts to consider as you start thinking through how DEIA or equity considerations or framework can show up authentically in what you're trying to do. And then the last slide is just a reminder and a nice quote that I found, but it's, whenever we allow people's identities to be a barrier and not an asset, we begin to see unnecessary distinctions. So it's important to value people's unique identities as assets to a full fabric of beautiful mosaic of difference, diversity, belonging, and humanity. So that's always the goal when we incorporate these type of presentations and mini trainings. So that's it for me, Sarah, unless anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Rianne. Do folks have questions while she's still on the screen? Yeah, Paul.
Hi, Paul Sheldon from Medford. I've never heard the phrase break through the binary of universal responses. Can you say more about that?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Thank you for that question. So what that essentially means is interrupting, the default that we tend to do when we're trying to solve for something or trying to support something, we either go that full one size fits all, and then it turns out we're not addressing everybody, or we go overboard and get so targeted that we're still missing the mark. And so the intent of incorporating that targeted universalism is creating that balance and interrupting that default that our system tends to fall into when we're trying to solve for supporting our communities or recruiting more folks and incorporating them into our workspaces.
Got it. Thank you.
Great question.
That is a great question. Other questions before we move into the small group activity? Well, thank you, Rudy Ann. This was just a wealth of information as always, and just appreciate you taking the time with us, even though I know you weren't able to join us in person, but your presence is definitely felt here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And if anybody does have any follow-up, because like I said, that's a lot to take in, feel free to reach out and ask any questions. I'm happy to connect.
Thank you. So this group activity is in between you and lunch, but bear with me. I know my stomach is growling a little bit in my seat, but I want you to kind of turn to your partner. I think that most folks have two people at each table and just spend about 15 minutes in a group activity that's really meant to think first. Like, you just heard a lot of information, and the slides that Rudy Ann shared are in your folder, but really think about some of the concepts that you heard. I know the targeted universalism really resonates with me as we're thinking about statewide policy and statewide strategies of how we really think about how equity fits in and the concept of target universalism fits in. But just think about the concepts and then turn to your partner and have a discussion really about how do you see this work manifesting in the work of the consortia? So I'm going to pull everyone back and then we'll have an opportunity to kind of share as a group. So reflect on Rudy Ann, that's the think part, think, pair, share, but reflect on Rudy Ann's talk and you have the slides in your folder, then pair with your partner and really have a conversation about how that might manifest in this group and the strategies that you all come up with. And then we'll have some time to share out as a consortia, and then we will take a break for lunch before we come back and hear from the panel. So I will bring you back in about 15 minutes.
Okay.
I'm gonna convene you back into the room. I'm contributing if anyone would love to take us off on what you thought about, talked about, and now we're in the sharing. Yeah.
At the risk of being the only person who puts his hand up. So we resonated with this heck equity stance statement. And particularly the clause about including intentional examination and elimination of these different categories. And that seemed a wonderful statement to us and a really useful one. Like, we don't have anything to suggest to improve on that. That's really good. And even beyond that, the 9 categories, I think it's low income, Jennifer.
It was, we figured it's 10, and that was the
But
one.
having all those categories is a broadening of the notion of diversity and inclusiveness. That it's not just about race anymore. It's not just about gender, and it's just not just about socioeconomic class, which are kind of the gimmies. But to add in LGBTQ and then Native tribes and formerly incarcerated people, now we've got a house that's big enough to accommodate our community. And gives us our marching orders for where do we start, look around at that. So that was kind of the heart of our talking.
I'm curious if others have anything to add or share in particular as you think about as you move into your short-term objectives as a consortia, how that the equity lens might manifest in your process, in your work, and the strategies you come up with. Or is everyone just hungry?
But it's more of a question than a comment, but we were looking at it through the employer lens. And I think all of, a lot of this framework, rightfully so, is around workforce preparedness and what happens in those structures that leads to the workforce. But how do you bridge between that preparation and then the actual workforce that awaits, right? So, so again, not a lot of answers, but that's an important component.
Yeah. So you're thinking like preparedness, and then when they enter that transition, or once they get there in the culture within the workforce.
Yeah, and to work on the workforce culture itself. And I mean, I think we're at a moment where there's some opportunities around with employers because of demographics and challenges of everybody here, filling out the jobs they have available, right? I mean, it's and that's not going to change anytime soon. So in terms of not thinking about necessarily one aspect of identity or those kinds of things, but more how is this a retention and workforce development tool for employers? And how do you incorporate these things to the advantage of the business? Because you're going to have a more effective and better retained workforce.
Yeah.
But how do you, what's our role in trying to bridge from here to there?
Yeah, that's great.
We talked a little bit also around kind of recruitment outreach and the company, the industry perspective. And one thing that our Hillsborough work group did with an advocacy and awareness campaign is we're working with community engagement liaisons. So we kind of had a group representing like Latino, Asian, Native American, like 9 different kind of cultural groups. And the feedback was pretty fascinating. And I think that's something this group can dig in. Like, they want to know, like, is there an equity manager at the industry? What does their cultural competency courses look like? That kind of retainment piece. And it's like, we're not going to go out and recruit from our communities until like, we know this, and this is existent in the company. So I thought that was a pretty interesting feedback.
Yeah, that's great. It's great you're already doing that feedback. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Well, we talked a little bit about like us centering on the problems that we're facing. So you just touched on one, right? So if it's recruitment, retention, what are the barriers that are really getting in the way of that, and making sure we're staying focused on that? Because I think that's part of the intention of this focus, is to not try to really say we're doing everything for diversity, equity, inclusion with this, but what is there a couple pieces that we can kind of focus on, and where when we look at it as a sector and not each individual business or each individual segment that we're trying to look at, but is there an opportunity for us to more broadly say, because there are going to be realities as well within manufacturing of, times that, a EQMS requires that you can only do business in one language. There's gonna be times that you can't like have certain barriers of what interacting with your team. So how do you figure out what's the barrier then and how do you create the opportunity to remove the barrier? And I think that it's gonna be, challenging in an area where we try to think about, like you said here, this broad perspective of, I think that there's lots of opportunities for us to think about, are there some barriers we all share together that could have an opportunity for us to remove?
And she used a term about checking,
Yeah.
and we don't definitely want to go.
No. Yeah, no, that's great. I don't know what you said. We aren't equity. Check, we aren't equity. I haven't heard that before, but I absolutely love it. Other thoughts and comments or just anything you want to elevate into the debate from your discussions?
We talked a lot about data here, and we liked the part that said there's a need to ask the right set of questions and collect the right data. And while we all recognize that we like data, we don't want to be working with people who are only just a number to us. And so how are we going to change that lens of collecting data that's more narratives and stories, more of a qualitative approach to data than this quantitative number? Because I feel like a lot of times that's creating a barrier in itself for people who don't want to be part of a hiring system because they're just looking, we kind of contended that the way that WorkSource is required to track people is so much that a lot of times we're collecting data that is focusing on the minutia of things instead of the big picture of hiring people and getting them skilled.
I love that. And I think not just narrative with data, but like data has context and making sure that context is explicit so that data is used for policymaking, funding decisions, but isn't causing harm when the data is just
like an impact statement kind of
love that.
to data more than just numbers.
Wonderful. Did I miss anyone that is eager to elevate your conversation into the room?
Well, I just wanted to add, we did a thing with Project Impact, and it was about how to collect data and surveys, and the mistake we often make is, what did would you recommend our program? Did you learn something? Which is all about you, it's all about us. And so they recommended really changing the way you collect data. Did you feel, for instance, did you feel like you were seen and heard, or did you feel, so asking the participants questions that they answer about themselves and their experience rather than about what they learned from your program. Yeah.
Well, I believe lunch is outside. I hope it is free. Awkward. Okay, so everyone, I think that we're grabbing lunches and coming back into this space for a facilitated panel discussion.
It's about 15
We have about
folks to mingle before we get started.
Great, so through these doors, and there's a sign right across the way that says lounge. That is where your lunch will be. So grab your lunches and mingle and then get back to this space in around 15 minutes. Thank you. I am going to hand it over to my colleague Jennifer Purcell, whom you obviously met earlier today. To facilitate a panel on with a number of community partners that are in the weeds around manufacturing workforce and education training programs. So Jennifer.
Thank you. You have to hear from me a little bit more today, but hopefully just for some introductory framing remarks, really looking forward to the conversation with these folks. I mentioned earlier, it's so important that you all hear about examples of best practices and some of the work that's already being implemented across the state. I think we've heard in a couple of different spaces that it's so important that we're not duplicating work, but learning from programs or projects that are successful in advancing a diverse workforce. last time at your kickoff meeting, you had the opportunity to hear from the Hillsborough Advanced Manufacturing Group. You heard from some community-based organizations and partners that are implementing work with particular communities that are a focus of the Future Ready Oregon investments. And today, we're going to focus on some of the education and training programs that have been successful. Both of these programs happen to be recipients of Workforce Ready grant funding, and as community colleges, both have the opportunity to advance programs through a number of Future Ready Oregon investments. But we're going to focus on a couple of programs here today that are manufacturing specific. I thought I'd mention today that I just got back from Washington, D.C. I had the opportunity to speak at the National Academies for Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And the roundtable was a focus on the STEM education ecosystem, and had the opportunity to talk about Future Ready Oregon as an example of advancing an education ecosystem that is connecting to employers and community, and what that means for systems change in STEM education. It was a great opportunity, and I happened to highlight both of these projects as part of that presentation. So today we have the opportunity to hear from Mount Hood Community College, and Kristen's going to talk a little bit about their advanced manufacturing program. And super excited also to have Carly joining from Microchip as one of the employer partners in the Mount Hood Community College work. And then we're also going to hear from PCC and the Quick Start Manufacturing Program. And Jesse is, I didn't say who you are. Pam is here representing PCC, and Jesse is representing Work Systems, Inc. as a partner in that work from the local workforce board. So hopefully this will give you a great introduction to a couple of really specific programs that are advancing the manufacturing workforce in Oregon. And I'm excited to let you introduce yourself. So what we'll do is take a couple of minutes to hear from each of you. If you could tell us a little bit about who you are, tell us about your program, and how it's advancing diverse manufacturing workforce in your region. And then we'll talk a little bit more about barriers that individuals are facing in manufacturing education and employment, and what opportunities you might see. But why don't we start with some introductions, and Kristen, I'll just let you start.
Hello, my name is Kristen Lima, and I'm the Dean of Applied Technology, Business and Information Systems at Mount Hood. And the partnership I have is with OMIC and Microchip. Carly is here representing Microchip. And it's amazing how some of these things start and how they grow into more than what you ever expected. And so we're really excited about the progress and the numbers we saw, and we're happy to share all the details of going from really building our mechatronics program from, in COVID time, I had 4 students. Currently, and last year was 16 students and 27 students signed up this year. And we just needed a tally of how many were Microchip employees. Over 50% of those students in our regular program were in partnership with Microchip. But really what we're here talking about is another partnership that we developed in applying for the Future Ready Oregon grant round 1. And it was a quick turnaround. I mean, we wrote it in a week or 2. And I was given a directive from my president, who is very involved in the semiconductor industry, has served as the chair for the education task force regarding it, and wanted something with this. And I started with OMIC, and then asked for Microchip. In a week, we had both of them, and we developed a mobile training lab system for us to take our classes to the employer. And so I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. Is what we started with. We can do introductions, and we'll go into more detail about what it was. But we have two different partnerships that go into.
Yeah, so I'm Carly Petrovic. I'm the Senior HR Manager for Microchip Technologies Oregon region. 90% of my responsibilities are supporting our wafer fab in Gresham. And you know, as most employers would sympathize with the pandemic, the labor shortage last couple of years, hiring talent was a real struggle. And you know, in order to produce all those computer chips, we have to keep that equipment running. And we just had this historic shortage of skilled technicians. So our executive vice president of manufacturing sat down with me and said, Carly, if you do anything else, I need you to figure out how to home grow our own workforce because there's just not enough of these skilled technicians out there. So that, you know, no pressure, right? And so really just started thinking about, all right, well, what can we do, right? I mean, obviously we didn't invent internships, but we just started partnering with the colleges to bolster an internship program. That became very successful. And then our full-time employers was just thinking, hey, how do we get in on that? You know, we were paying the tuition in advance for the interns to kind of differentiate ourselves. So then we developed an in-house apprenticeship program that was designed for full-time employees that, you know, couldn't afford to lose benefits, couldn't afford, you know, intern pay. And it was a way to get our existing workforce those opportunities. And then on top of that, just with our community partners being so amazing, then they said, wait, well, let's do more. And that's where, you know, Dr. Lima introduced us to the Future Ready grants and the on-site learning. We've been working with work systems to just really bolster our outreach. And it's just really become a home run. And so becoming more successful than we ever expected it to. So it's been really exciting. I've been learning along the way. I'm not a workforce development expert, but I feel like I will be pretty soon. So
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pam Hester, and I'm the Program Dean for Community Workforce Development and the Opportunity Centers at Portland Community College. We have two opportunity centers. One is in Washington County, and the other is in Multnomah County, and both exist to reverse racial and economic disparities by connecting people with opportunities to transform their lives through education and career track employment. So we have a strong focus, especially on manufacturing and healthcare, because those offer paths to economic mobility for folks. We have a range of supports from our training and education specialists. We get referrals from our community-based partners, neighborhoods, social groups that come to us. And they're typically people who are disconnected from the education system, who maybe have a high school diploma or GED, but didn't go on to higher ed, or maybe they did go on to a little higher ed, but they're in a career change moment. And we help them figure out what path they want to go. We have classes called Discover Manufacturing that are 2-week classes that are sort of like a survey course. And what are the careers in manufacturing? And what are the programs at PCC that can get them to those careers? And then we'll talk about the quick start here in a second. But our aim really is to build and grow that pathway so that we have prospective students who are supported to engage with PCC and then have really valuable, important jobs in manufacturing. I'll let you do a quick start.
Okay.
I mean, I won't let you can.
I'm Jesse Aronson. I'm with Work Systems. We're the workforce board for Multnomah and Washington counties. I'm a program manager there, and I oversee a lot of the different programs that happen out of local work source centers in our region. I've been a part of the Quick Start program, I'd say since day one. Probably about 1.5 years ago, Business Oregon pulled together Intel, the city of Hillsborough, and Work Systems, just to talk to them about their projected workforce needs and their desire to really increase representation from people of color and women in their technical roles. And so we started working together, thinking about, well, what could we do in this area? And they mentioned a program that they had launched down in Arizona, which was a 2-week boot camp course that, they had some high hopes for and wanted to replicate that locally. And so we started heading down that path, trying to make that happen. We applied for a State of Oregon Strategic Innovation Grant and received that. Really just to seed fund the program, get it off the ground. And at that point, we brought PCC on board and really connected it to WorkSource and launched the first class about 1 year ago exactly. And so I think to date, we've trained like 197 people. And we're still going. We got another Future Ready grant from HEC, and we're looking to expand it to Multnomah County now and support other manufacturers in the region.
Great, thank you all so much. So I'd love to hear a little bit more. We've got a couple unique projects. One, we heard a little bit about the mobile lab and how that unique approach to providing on-site training is overcoming barriers. And the other sort of a career exploration program, quick condensed access. And Pam, you talked a little bit about the wraparound supports that PCC offers. So if you could all talk a little bit more about barriers that students and employees are facing in education and employment. What do you know about the barriers and what has been successful in addressing those barriers, either, from each of your perspectives? So whether it's from the community college or the employer or the local workforce board. Go ahead. We'll start on this side.
So one of the great things about, so I mentioned the Discover Manufacturing class that really is, it's a 2-week, sort of survey class. The Quick Start to Semiconducting is also 2 weeks. It's highly intensive. It's an accelerated learning program. And one of the barriers that we know is that low-income adults need income. And to take time out to get some training is a real barrier. So Work Systems added a stipend for participants to recognizing that we value their time and that they need to support themselves while they're in the training program. So they get $500 a week as long as they attend full time. We will, our team at WorkSource and our team at PCC will work together to make sure they have transportation in line if they need childcare. One of the barriers of folks, as you well know, going into careers, especially in manufacturing, is finding childcare. And we're still sort of working with employers on that. But just getting that initial hump of understanding what career paths there are for someone in manufacturing. It's sort of an obscure industry if you don't know a lot about it. So building up those initial skills through the Quick Start program, they really have enough to get an entry-level job. And then the next barrier really is continuing their education. So we've gotten a scholarship. Anyone who takes the Quick Start to Semiconducting gets a $1,000 scholarship to continue their degree with PCC. So we're trying to make it not just a first step, but a first step in a long career in manufacturing.
Yeah, just to add on to the stipend piece, I mean, we have added that to other training programs that we coordinate. And even, longer term training programs, which are more like a one-term program. And we really have seen it make a big difference in like less support service requests, like less people seeking rent assistance during the training, less dropping out of training. And so it has been really beneficial. But now we're kind of like, what's the right stipend amount? Are we paying too much? Are people doing it just for the stipend? Or, so it's something that we're still, trying to figure out, but it's definitely helped a lot.
A little bit more about our project was to really focus on incumbent programs. So we didn't have the issues that they're talking about employment. What we were trying to do was to operators move them to technicians. Carly mentioned we're trying to home ground. And I think that's one of the things that was completely different than anything that I had worked on before, because usually we'll take students before they actually enter into the field. And this time we're taking students who are in the field. And the barriers were quite different because we're working with a population who had maybe never taken a college class and how they could be successful. And we also wanted to focus if they were taking a college class, they were going to, it's a credit bearing. And that's a huge difference in some of our other work. And we have that as well as of community education and the outreach to train incumbent workers. But this is the first time that we had one that was a credit bearing. So that it changed our focus a little bit. And talk a little bit about our statistics. In the very beginning, so Carly And our partners also went on some meeting, and we were really hoping for 10 students at each side. And what we did is we offered, the reason why we wanted 2 employers is so that we could have both nights, because with the compressed shift and semiconductors, students are only available on one of the days, so you really can't have a 2-day class, you really have to make it to 1 day. So our goal was 10 each. Wow. How many did you have sign up?
We had 100 employees express interest. Like, we were blown away.
And onset I had about the same, I think like 75 or 80, and we're like, oh, wow, what are we gonna do with it? Well, so we were able to accommodate 48 students in the first classes. So 24, just brought the standard size for a mechatronics class, 24 each night. They were split. Some of the other challenges were that we have 2 companies who are both semiconductors, and they don't compete for customers, but they do compete for talent. So that was like kind of one of the barriers for us. Both in a room, and you know, I was leading them, but if that was really my role, because if one of the companies led it or the other, then it would be more on their program. This was a program from that side. And so we got through a lot of those little tough meetings with each week about how we're going to serve these students, making sure that they don't really try to go to the other company, because the next piece of it is we took the classes to them. That was another barrier that we eliminated because they're afraid to come to college. We took it to them. And one night was at Microchip, the other night was an on-semi. So their employees went over to on-semi, like they're gonna see what the other has, but it's so far, it's worked out great. We were able to fill out all those seats. The other thing that's a barrier is that with a lot of our organization or our companies, they do tuition reimbursement. How many of you have that? Well, tuition reimbursement is really a barrier as well, because if you're working as an operator, you don't have $1,000 to go spend on a class with the hopes that you're going to be refunded. And so we flipped it, and part of the grant was we gave it to the 2 companies, and then we turned around and paid the tuition. So it was like this loop. So it stayed within that they were actually paying tuition. It wasn't just a free class. It's part of of all our other statistics. So there's a couple of barriers, and then it would be good, I think, for Carly to say that where she started was really not where I came into the picture, and you started to begin with, and then with our programs. About the picture.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the barriers that our, you know, the incumbent workforce was facing was much of what everyone's touched on, you know, where it's just like, I have adult responsibilities, right? You know, as someone who works full-time, maybe they're single parents, you know, and so that was one of the biggest barriers. And, you know, what we found is that, as you all know, there's a lot of money out there, but people don't necessarily know that, you know, and so that's why Microchip came up with this model where we're proactively paying the tuition for the interns and apprentices or the participants in mobile learning. And what we have found is that kind of makes people say, oh, okay, you know, that it's kind of less skin in the game for them. It actually costs us very little because most of our incumbent workers actually qualify for lots of grants and different things. And so I have a good percentage of my folks that are in either the apprenticeship or the internship that I don't pay a dime for anything because things are covered. And so that's, I think, one of the barriers is people are just afraid of how expensive it will be. I think the other biggest barrier is that so many people just don't think that this is something they can do, right? You know, I'll be honest, our interns, they tend to skew younger, whiter, and male, you know, and we have this whole population of hardworking, smart folks that we just weren't seeing participating in the tuition reimbursement and signing up. And what was just so amazing about these programs is we kind of put these out there and made them very accessible. And we had a lot of our incumbents join these. And then they thought, oh, that wasn't so bad. I actually could do that. And then their friends enrolled the next term, and then their friends did, you know, and so it really rippled. And so I think sometimes just the perceptions of barriers are what hold folks back.
So great. And I love all the things that you're talking about. One of the things that was mentioned at this conference I had the opportunity to attend is the sort of the changing demographic of students and the workforce. And as we're thinking about meeting the needs of individuals who are balancing work and school and family, that looks different than the way that our systems maybe are structured to support students and employees today. So these are great examples. I'm curious to hear from all of you as this group is thinking about and developing recommendations for connecting people with manufacturing jobs. What challenges or opportunities should they be mindful of? Are there elements of your work that are replicable or scalable? Some of those lessons learned that this group should be mindful of. And maybe we'll start on this side.
I think one of the biggest barriers for us is like getting that foot in the door of one of the companies and who do you talk to? And you can start at the top with the general manager, but it doesn't really get to the one who's going to make it happen early next to me. So that's some of the, I think, even as a community college educator for years, it's starting with those partnerships and opening those doors. It's sometimes hard to make that door open. And
I think to segue from that, I think what's been so important and what's been such a key component in microchip success is the aggressiveness of work systems in the colleges to get their foot in the door, because we're busy, right? There's been plenty of times where we oh yeah, okay, I'll get to that later. And we kind of blow them off. And if it weren't for the persistence of work systems and the colleges working with us to help us make these successful, I don't think we would be where we are today. And so that would be definitely one piece of advice, is that you really have to be persistent with employers, because now now that we have these relationships, there's nothing that I would say no to if Kristen asked or if Jesse asked. But yet, if it weren't for them harassing us nonstop, it wouldn't have gotten to that point.
and part of that too is like making the successful grant applications, right? We were successful in the first round of funding. And then, well, what do we do for the second one? And what does that look like? And I think having that partnership and being able to really talk to your partners about it before you try to apply for the funding is really what I think made our application very successful, because they were already in place. I had the support letters from the two companies as I applied, which is not a requirement in Future Ready Oregon at all. But I thought, okay, wait, if I'm saying that this is going to happen, I better have the documentation to back it up. And so I had letters from both of them to say, yes, we're engaged and we're going to partner. So as we're making those recommendations, it's like the industry has to be open to allowing an education opportunity to come in and vice versa. So, and how do you do that?
And I think there are some really key elements that we built into the second round of Future Ready Oregon funding for a new manufacturing micro-credential. And that is really like, this has been a true collaboration. We took a curriculum that Intel developed and tested in Arizona and brought it up here and refined it with their employees or past employees. We've got funding from Work Systems and City of Hillsborough. City of Hillsborough is making sure that we're connecting the dots with other initiatives happening in the community. But I think one of the key things, and I'm curious if you agree, one of the key things is actually that persistence. We meet every other week as a project team. There are folks from Intel, there are folks from Work Systems, folks from PCC who are part of my training team, and folks from PCC who are part of my work source team. And we are diving into the details to make sure it's on track and continuous improvement. And City of Hillsborough, who's in those meetings. So it's like, it's persistent and it's consistent.
I agree with everything Pam said, and I think one other thing to think about when like designing training programs and trying to get people into manufacturing is having, a business at the table that gave input to whatever the program design is, whatever the learning content is, and having the business commit to interviewing everybody who successfully completes it Because that goes a long ways as far as people wanting to go try a program is like, if they know, if they go through this, that they'll have an interview with Intel. I mean, you're gonna attract so many more people to that program if you can attach some companies to it, if you can show like kind of the wages, the pathways, the opportunity for the individual. That's just, I think, so critical to have that, you know, employment commitment, or at least interview commitment.
Great. Well, we have a little bit of time to open it up to questions from the consortium. Do folks have questions for our panelists? Yeah.
One for Carly. So what's the wage difference between the operators and the technicians? And did I understand correctly that just 2 nights worth of training is all it takes to get there? No. Okay.
No, so there's a big wage difference. So your average operator comes in at a base pay of $18.75 before their shift differential, and that's pretty standard in semiconductor. So they're really making anywhere around $20 to $23 an hour, depending on the shift they're working, and that's without any overtime. A technician, on the other hand, I would say, you know, back in the good old days before this crazy COVID and labor shortage, we would start them between $24 and $26 an hour. That's kind of just gone out the window, and these technicians really command any wage they want. And so that's one thing that I'm stressing to my employees and my incumbent workers. It's like, you know, your earning potential is so huge in a technician job. I've got technicians that are under 30 years old making 6-figure income, just because of the nature of the work. So it's a much higher pay scale working as a technician. That being said, it does have the credentialing and the education components. With our internship program, that's a lower pay. That's really truly designed for full-time college students. And so that's anywhere from $18 to $20 an hour, depending on where they are in their program. The apprenticeship model follows the same compensation program that our production operators do. And that was part of it, because we needed to maintain that level of income for them in order for them to make that work, because they had families or whatnot.
So how long is the whole training course then to go from operator to technician?
Well, that's the part of it. We started with, it's a 38 credit.
38 credits.
30 credit, but what we're also doing is we're taking 3 of those credits for credit for prior learning. And like for example, industrial safety, we know that they're doing it. They don't need to take another class with us, but it is required for the certificate. So we anticipate that our students who start and finish with us for the 38 credits will take us almost 3 years, because of the fact that they go 1 night a week. And we also had kind of a challenge in that from employers, they said only 2.5 hours a week per class, because a lot of them are already working 12-hour shifts. So to tack on any more than 2.5 hours. But the college has to be willing to think outside the box in their scheduling. So none of our classes fit into our traditional quarter system. So for example, right now, we're in the middle of AC/DC class. We started mid-July. It'll finish right before Thanksgiving. And our next class will start right after the new year, because we know that during the holidays, it's not the best. So it is a much longer class because of, you know, that's traditionally a 5-hour a week class for 10 weeks. And so there's no way that we were going to get 5 hours in 1 night, and they can only attend 1 night. They can't attend 2 because the other one they're working. So it's like you do have to balance. So yes, it's quite a process. But I will say that both the bus work systems and Mount Hood applied for the Future Ready Oregon with that component of the 2 week. The difference is that we're planning to do it as a credit class and partnership with work systems, and using our curriculum and then modifying what else that they've already done to be able to be able to do the work, that part of it, to get operators in, right? So as we get operators to move to technicians, we need more operators, and those are the entry level.
That makes a lot of sense.
I also want to stress, though, at least at Microchip, and this might be different for other semiconductor manufacturers, but we don't require that the student is done with their program to qualify to take one of those technician jobs. In fact, I think of the second intern we hired in this program, he worked for about 1 summer and just was killing it and said, hey, can I apply for that job? Applied for it and got it, you know? And so, and I've had a few success stories like that where, you know, I had an incumbent worker who was really interested in our apprenticeship program, but he missed the first round. He didn't qualify yet. So he He took my advice, he got enrolled at Mount Hood, and then I followed up with him. I said, hey, Sergio, you're gonna apply for the apprenticeship. Oh, no, I already got promoted to tech. Sorry, you know, I don't. It's like, all right, great. And so that's something we really stress to our folks too, is that, you know, you don't have to be done with your 2 to 3 year program to be eligible. And so that's been really, really attractive as well.
Thank you.
Brian.
Yeah, I think probably primarily for Jesse, but maybe if there's others that can answer this, have you done any more, or any success where you really had the partnership with the employer first? Because you had mentioned like getting the interviews was part of attraction to the program, but have you done something where like an employer says, I'll take a cohort of 15 and pay their stipend for the 2 weeks? And then it's kind of almost like they're onboarding. Has that ever been something? Because I mean, part of that whole piece also for, you know, smaller HR teams or other things is like getting them even like the basic like safety and introductory to things is like, I think that's something employers would be interested in doing, and then the stipend doesn't have to come out of the grant money, right? It's like, how do you get them started?
Yeah, we haven't got there yet. I mean, we have been, we have explored some like class sponsorship options. And we've done this like with other programs, but I think that's where we'd like to get to, you know, is where a company, I mean, PCC used to have a program where it was, once a company hired a graduate, then they would pay back into the program, and it was kind of, you know, it saved them a lot of onboarding and recruitment costs and whatever else. But yeah, so we are looking to get there, but we're not there yet.
Logan and then Eric, and then I think we'll have to move on. But
I'm curious about the 2-week manufacturing careers and kind of exploratory course. Could you talk a little bit more about what that entails?
Yeah, it's a fast course. So we incorporate everything. We talk about the range of careers that are available in manufacturing. We bring in employers, we bring in folks from PCCs, admissions recruiting, or the academic programs that they could connect to. We incorporate a little bit of essential skills. So every day we are weaving in that. Every day we're weaving in study skills. So the idea is that by the time someone leaves that course, they have a clearer path of what they might want to pursue in manufacturing, and they're starting to build the skills that they'll need to succeed in education and career. And then we have staff who will sort of help them make that next step and refine their goals a little bit more. But it's sort of a round robin of like other people in the community, especially it may be other people in the community that look like them, that come from their communities, because that's very important. And then what are the options for the paths?
That was exactly my question.
Magic. So then we have time for one more. Go ahead, Abby.
We're from Southern Oregon. I won't let you have so much. Do you know if RCC down there? I'm emailing them right now. I know Equus does something like that, but they only have construction. They don't really do manufacturing. What you're doing is exactly what I want to do in Southern Oregon. I'm not aware of Rogue having anything. Carrie, do you know? No. Okay, well, I'm telling them right now all about you. Maybe I'll introduce you.
I think Rogue has some, that's an interesting thing because, you know, how many in the room can find what mechatronics is, right?
I can, because Kristen told me.
The thing is that's an interesting word. How do we come up with it? Why do we call it that? You know, it used to be called maintenance technician or some other type of definition of the combination of those 3 different fields. And so it's kind of asking the question of what do they have? And are they willing to design a program that would go around it? Like, it takes a long time for us to get a new class. But if the class already exists, like, so what I would do is take the intro to mechatronics class, which talks about the different fields of manufacturing and why you use those skills. And the second learning outcome is about communication and being able to communicate effectively. So those are the 2 outcomes of that 10-hour class. That's what I would take for the 2 weeks. So it just depends on what that community college has. And I'm sure they're as willing to kind of open their eyes to different ways to do it. You just have to ask that question. What are you willing to do with a class that's on the traditional 10-week?
And then the other piece to add to what Dr. Lima said is that
that the employer need is really driving it, right? Like, Intel based this model on creating a new position that was lower level than their existing entry level position because they wanted to recruit women, and people from communities of color. So there was creativity on the part of the employer and creativity on the part of the educational institution. That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
But this can be applied to anything in manufacturing, and Jenny and I were just talking about that. She needs machinists. We have a machining program, but what are those 6 classes that she needs with the skill set? For this partnership was all about mechatronics and finish a certificate, because for the community college, they need to finish something. That's how we're measured on institutional classes, that they've achieved a certificate or a degree. And that's how a lot of our funding, especially with the changing of your funding formula. And it's going to be more onto how do you make sure they finish our work with such a degree.
And I didn't mean to imply that Intel believes that women and people of color could only access lower level, entry level positions. Because they win all of that. Any of us, it's not a career that's marketed well in the communities. So people aren't likely to commit to our 2-year or 4-year program without knowing what they're getting into. And that's really what it was.
We would also encourage you to participate in Manufacturing Day if your community college does that as well, because opening your doors to those high school students. I mean, Manufacturing Month is October. Make sure that you're out there being able to open it up for people to see what you do, because that's a lot of the concept of Manufacturing Days. A high school student goes to a manufacturing firm, sees the jobs, comes to the college where they can learn the skills. So if you get asked for that, please say yes. It'll be a year from now, but.
It's interesting because in our community, we have to like go beg the education groups who want to participate in Manufacturing Day. Like, please, we'll provide the transportation, bring your students for the tour. So it's just like, it's interesting to think about ways, and especially for even more rural employers, it's actually the opposite of, trying to get the groups to want to come.
We just had Manufacturing Day that was a partnership between OMIC R&D and PCC OMIC, and we had 850 high school students out.
Wow.
High school and middle, they were both middle school students.
We had 300, and you learn something every year when you do it. So Manufacturing Day should be something that we all support, because getting those, just to open the eyes of high school students, we expose them once, and our goal at Mount Hood is that every high school student will at least come to Mount Hood once in their high school career, and then move on to us.
Well, thank you all so much. This has been great. And I hope that you all as consortium members can see how we're sort of building your toolbox of information. Today was a really great practical set of examples of how education and industry informed education programming and complementing with community partners for the examples that we heard the last time we were together. Today, we also heard examples of both for credit and not for credit opportunities. We heard about entry pathways and career exploration, as well as advancement opportunities with a focus on incumbent workers. We heard about barriers, like overcoming barriers to transportation and scheduling, childcare, and the opportunity costs of having to give up income while you participate in and explore education. And more than anything, I heard from both programs and all of our panelists sort of this overcoming the barrier of seeing yourself as successful in education. And I think we've learned a lot about many of the communities and populations that Future Ready Oregon is designed to serve, and the barriers, both real and perceived, that wraparound supports and different delivery methods can really help to overcome. So we appreciate all of you and the work that you're doing and providing the examples for folks here today. So join me in thanking our panelists. I think we'll just a quick transition break, and then we're going to hear from Gail with a bit of a data refresher. So I guess we have about 10 minutes. Thank you.
About 7 minutes.
Sorry.
So the rest of the day for about, I guess, an hour and a half. Goodness, that feels quick. We are going to be focusing on our short-term objective, which is advising future rounds of workforce ready grant funding. And so we thought it would be really great to just do a quick data refresher. And so wanted to, before we dive into sort of the rest of the process for doing that, but wanted to introduce one of your consortium members, Gail Krumenauer, from the Oregon Employment Department, who's going to walk us through a quick data refresher.
Hello, everyone, and I will apologize on both ends because I have meetings and I bookended on both sides today, so I wasn't here for introductions. For those of you who didn't meet me yet, my name is Gail Krumenauer, State Employment Economist in the Research Division at the Oregon Employment Department. And I will stick around for just as long as I can after this, but I have to bolt back to Salem, just like I bolted up here this morning. So I don't have a data disclaimer either, but I just wanted to highlight the point that was made down the table here, and I'm not sure who said it, about the people in the stories behind the data. I really loved the panel and some of the things that they talked about as well, because I have the summary level statistics. It's actually a violation of law if I talk about people's personally identifiable stuff. So, but one of the things that we do in other avenues, and that I think can be particularly beneficial to employer communities and others. So it won't be what you see today, but it is stuff that I'm heavily invested in. It's one of my favorite things that we do is actually track people as they go through their careers and talk about, you know, for example, people who experienced pandemic disruptions to their employment, following them and seeing what their outcomes are like later, and then attaching demographics to those folks as well, so that we can see among different communities, younger workers, women, race, ethnicity, the things that we can identify, what's happening to them and what are the disparities in those and why might they be happening. So that's not something we'll talk about today, but it's something that came up earlier. It's something that I love, and it's something that I would love to be able to talk to anybody about if you're interested in what we've done in that kind of work. But for now, summary data is what you're stuck with me, and I will be brief. I was asked to actually give the same presentation that I did a couple months ago, but we update our data. We've done 3 times since then. So the stuff that you heard is kind of outdated. So I just a quick refresh. Some of it will look familiar, but it's just a little bit newer. And I will be as brief as I can.
And your slides are in there.
Oh, what she said. Go ahead and move us over to the first one and I'll get going. So just high level labor market information. I'm going to start on the total non-farm payroll employment side, and then we'll switch to talking about the labor force and the household worker side. So as I said, the last time that we got together, Oregon has more jobs now than we did before the pandemic recession. And the reason that you're not just looking at a line graph of that, but instead of a map, is that even though we've regained those 280,000 plus jobs that were lost, they did not land in the same spots or get recreated in the same spots that they were lost before. So geographically, this map is giving you a look at where employment is now relative to before the pandemic recession. So the darker it's shaded, the more jobs it has now relative to in February 2020, about half. So this is as of August. The brand new county level data comes out tomorrow. So as of August, half of all of Oregon's counties also had more jobs than they did before the pandemic recession, with those lighter shaded areas being the ones that are not fully recovered. So areas in Lane, Southern Oregon, Multnomah, along the coast, parts of Eastern Oregon, and a couple other spots as well. As we move over to the next slide.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. I just need a quick reason why it's non-farm related data.
Because that's how they set it up in 1939. And they just never changed it. Statistics included. Yeah. I don't have a good reason. I'm sorry. But that's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's very much back in Turkey, I'm sorry. But when we talk about the labor force side, when we switch over to that, that's what we call household employment. And so that would include anybody who is employed on a payroll, if they're working in farming, if they're self-employed, if they're living in Oregon, but working for a company that's based in Vermont. So when we talk about that, that'll be employment. That is everybody that's working, but this is.
I'm only asking because I shared this because you shared this data with me not very long ago. And that was the first question that everybody in my high ag county asked. And I was like, I don't know, but now I know. It's just a tricky.
So thank you for the question. And as we're switching here, similarly, as they didn't all fall back where they were geographically, we're looking at different trends among different sectors in Oregon's economy. So we went through this period of almost 2 years where pretty much every month Oregon was adding jobs, and most sectors would have been on this side, to the plus. And over the past year, things have really started to shift a bit more. We've had a handful of months where we've actually lost jobs over the month. And there are some sectors that are declining too. So over the past year, Oregon's added about 29,000 jobs. And most of those, more than 12,000, have been added in private healthcare and social assistance. And then about 10,000, just shy of 10,000, have been added in leisure and hospitality. So those have been the two biggest ones that are gaining. And there's still some makeup to the February 2020 level, particularly in leisure and hospitality and in parts of healthcare. Nursing and residential facilities, really. At the bottom, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't point out within this group that manufacturing has lost the most jobs of any sector in Oregon over the past year. It's down by 4,100. And we talked about this the last time, that under manufacturing, there's two big broad categories. One is durable goods that last, at least a few years, and then the other one is non-durable goods. What we're actually seeing underneath this is that durable goods manufacturing has declined by 4,800 jobs over the past year, and non-durable goods, things like food manufacturing, paper manufacturing, those kind of things, is up by about 700. So that's pretty stable. Again, also down by 4,000 jobs over the years, transportation, warehousing, and utilities. And then retail trades down by 3,700 jobs over the past year as well. So just really different trends in really different parts of Oregon's economy. And yeah, I'll switch to the next. Before I switch to the next slide though, Columbia County. So specifically in Columbia County, overall employment is up by 160 jobs over the past year. Manufacturing is down by 12%. So down 210 jobs over the past year, and still 140 below the pre-pandemic level of February 2020. And I wanted to note that paper manufacturing accounts for 60% of those losses in Columbia County. So switching to the next slide. So I just called out paper manufacturing, right, in Columbia County, but overall statewide, it's added 100 jobs over the past year. So manufacturing, durable goods, non-durable goods. And then I wanted to look at kind of some of the more detailed ones that we published. And unfortunately, the plus 100 in paper manufacturing happens to be the bright spot to share among these. Transportation equipment stable over the past year, but still below its February 2020 level. And then we're looking at declines in wood products, fabricated metals, computer electronic products, machinery, foods over the past 12 months. Yes.
Does this trend in Oregon mirror the national trend, or is Oregon losing manufacturing jobs on durable goods faster than?
I don't know if it's faster or not, but we are seeing the same trends nationally, like for example, like healthcare being the big growth industry recently. Healthcare and leisure and hospitality were very similar to the US in that, and manufacturing has been struggling nationally as well. It's different kinds of manufacturing, different degrees in different places, and I can get more specific comparison side by side that you can see and share that back with the whole group to look at. But we are not starkly different from the United States in those broader trends. Oh, there's like 3 hands. Okay, I'm gonna start. Thank you.
How does this relate to the sort of height of the pandemic? Like what was manufacturing relative to the other sectors from 2020 to 2022?
So hold on, are you asking if it was growing or if it was?
What was it relative to others? So for this last year, manufacturing was worse than everybody else.
Yes.
What was it during those pandemic years?
During the pandemic years, so roughly, let's just say like 2020, 2021, through those couple of years. But one of the things about manufacturing, and I didn't bring it because I was like, I was just online graph. Right now I wish I had it. Actually have it right there. But so the thing about manufacturing in general is that the way I describe it is that it's kind of like a downward sloping roller coaster. And so anytime the economy turns down, manufacturing turns down. It's pro-cyclical, or when the economy goes down, unlike healthcare, which tends to keep growing regardless of economic conditions, minus in 2021. But it would usually turn down. And when the economy is growing, manufacturing will grow as well, but it doesn't ever get back to where it was before. So in the pandemic, if we're talking about 2020, 2021, the really remarkable thing about manufacturing to me is that it got back up to 95 to 98% of where it was before the pandemic recession, which is completely different than the trend before. It actually almost achieved a completely full recovery. Again, not all in the same spots, not all in the same places and things like that, but that it had that trend, regardless of how it compares to the other ones, because I don't know that right off the top of my head for those years, but that growth was that strong across that period is something that you wouldn't have expected to see. I wouldn't have expected to see based on historical. Does that help? Okay, and then.
Yeah, I just had a quick question, Gail. When you said that the 40% of the loss in Columbia County was because of Kathleen tissue shutting down, is that what you said, or did I miss something?
I did not say anything about any particular company's employment patterns, because that would be something that I am not capable of doing. But that industry in itself, the losses in manufacturing hold on, I gotta go back and see if it was the 1 year period or the 2 year period. So compared to February 2020, manufacturing overall in Columbia County is down by 140 jobs, and 60% of that decline is because of paper manufacturing.
So to that, so the public workforce system has what we call rapid response groups that, for those of you who don't know, move in when there's a potential closure or a threat of a closure or a layoff aversion tactic. We go in and try to reemploy, get the folks. And I know that the data that you present is usually looking in the rearview mirror, right? We're behind. So is it, we expect to see if a lot of those layoffs or those individuals were reemployed through the rapid response system, that we would start to see that incline, or does that just, once it goes down like that, it stays?
That's a great question. Yes, rapid response, there is, kind of those active efforts to get people before the actual closure then happens, right, into another job. And that's fantastic. That would show up if someone transitioned from a job to another one, they would show up as employed in wherever they landed, right? Like, ideally, you would take somebody who is maybe going to lose their job in August, get them successfully transferred into another job, and then they would show up as employed wherever that other job was in September, right? So that's how data-wise that transition works. In terms of how many people are actually then helped and actively placed into another position because of that, that's not data that I have access or am able. I don't know how to, I would love it. I don't know where it lives though, but so I'm not sure if that helps answer your question.
It does, and my apologies for calling out any particular company, but
you can call out particular companies. I can call them out as like general examples. You're like, oh, Les Schwab has a business that's in management of companies, and they also have retail stores, but I can't say anything else about the jobs.
In my world, when there's a potential down, it's like spreads like wildfire.
Yeah, all hands on deck, so.
Well, and the things that come out, if anybody doesn't subscribe to it, it's very, well, it's interesting to me, but they're called WARN notices that come from the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. And those publicly say like, this company is laying off this many people. And one of the things I would also note that I've been very actively keeping an eye on this year is that those large notices, because there's not all companies have to do this. It's, certain types of companies, and they tend to be big layoffs. And so I haven't redone the tally since July, but in the first half of 2023 alone, I had seen a larger volume of those more notices, those types of things than I had seen for the entire year in either 2018 or 2019. And so that's something that as well. Okay, I'm gonna give it a go
I
here.
have a very quick
Oh, yes.
question.
Oh, good. You're asking.
Are you seeing that the decline in manufacturing employment is across all occupation categories? Or are there differences based on, you know, entry level versus mid-level versus advanced?
I wish I could answer that too, because it would be absolutely fantastic, but on a monthly basis. So this kind of stuff that we get, employers are only required to tell us if they're subject to paying unemployment insurance taxes, not all. That's why another reason we have a big hole in our data in ag is because a lot of it's excluded. But they're only required to tell us how many jobs they had. And then there's like one little comment code that they can either say like, oh, we had unseasonably low demand or like unseasonably high demand. Or something like they don't have to tell us anything about the types of jobs or anything else. We have a separate survey that doesn't cover all employers, but covers a large chunk of them, where once a year they tell us the types of jobs that they have working for them. So I wish I could tell. Okay, any other questions? There was one over here. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not concerned, but I just have this question about percent change. So like a couple slides back when you had like manufacturing went down, or even, well, you can even look right there on that other slide. So like how, in terms of like number of workers, right? Like manufacturing lost 4,000 workers. On the other side, only 300 of them were from semiconductor industry or related manufacturing, which is a really small percent change for the chips industry. Do you see what I'm saying? I just wonder if percent change would be a helpful way for us to look at something like this, just because.
Yes, so
I'm trying to
just
scare
for,
my students, so I just want to.
yeah, no, that's fine. That's totally fine. So just top of mind, this is a gain of just over 5%, and this is a gain of just under 5% compared to 1.5% for Oregon overall. Yeah, I should have it off the top of my head and I don't. But I can look it up as soon as I sit down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I do math all day long, but not very well in my head.
And just a time check.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, it's great. First of all, I just loved these questions because I think of I'm in the healthcare, leading the healthcare work, and we have endless conversations around data in that space. So these are really good questions. So we might not have time to field the rest of the questions, but I think it's really important to jot them down because as you're going through your working groups, identifying missing information, identifying additional analysis is going to be critical to moving into some of your priority setting. So just want to encourage you to keep thinking the way you're thinking. We just might not have time to answer all the questions.
But I love them. They're really engaging.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
Okay. Were there any, sorry, not to like deter anybody, but is there any there? Okay, I'm going to switch over then to the labor force stuff, and this will be short, sweet, and probably not anything that you didn't already know. But like we talked about before, unemployment is near a record low in Oregon. It was 3.5% in September. The record low going back to 1976 is 3.4%, which it was for the 2 months before September. One of the things that's different about unemployment right now is that we've seen the unemployment rate get back down to this record low because the labor force is declining. So the number of people in Oregon's labor force has gone down by about 41,000 people between January and September. And that's largely driven by retirements. And that's something that I expect to continue seeing happen for the next 5 to 7-ish years. We're still in the baby boomer retirement cohort, but we've seen that at the same time that this unemployment rate is going down and the labor force is declining, we're seeing a large uptick in the number of people reporting that they're not in the labor force because they're retired. So that does seem to be driving a large portion of it. And then if we switch over to the next one quickly, again, just like I was talking about before when I showed you the map, this is a geographic breakout of unemployment. And the point here is that the current rate, this dot, is much closer to the lowest unemployment rate in any given area than it is to the highest. So it's not just one area that has low unemployment or, oh, it's great in all these areas except for mine. Unemployment's low across all the areas of Oregon. Last slide that I have, there's a lot of words to go along with it, but and this is something that we talked about last time as well, is one of the things that we have already heard and said today. We talked about it before. Everybody has been talking about it when I'm not around here. Is that it's hard to find enough workers. Low unemployment is driving the difficulty finding enough workers. And particularly that crunch where we're in, low unemployment and we're not seeing the population influx that we've seen in prior years where people move here and take jobs. That's not happening. And there's parts of Oregon where that's been the case for a while, but now that it's more widespread across the state, it's definitely elevated level of attention, I think, in some areas where people hadn't talked about it before. But so that low unemployment and that we're not seeing growth in the labor force is making it hard to find enough workers. This is just for manufacturing. Overall, there's still a really high level of job openings. It's been about 70,000 at any given time throughout the first 9 months of this year. Prior to the pandemic recession, the highest number we'd ever seen was 67,000 in the summer of 2017. So we're just now at what would be considered like a pre-pandemic record after going through 2 years where at points we were over 100,000 job openings. So there's still a lot of hiring, a lot of employers trying to fill a lot of job openings out there. The thing that's changed since the last time I talked to you is that we were still seeing relatively high demand in manufacturing, and now it's gone down quite a bit. So it's in the neighborhood of 2,600 job openings, which is more like what we've seen in the winter. So that's a summer job number. So there's about 2,600, 26 or 2,800 in between July and September, which is more like what we would see in as a winter number in some of these prior years. Yes.
Have you looked back to 2007, 2008 and looked at whether or not any of the macroeconomic trends of the times when it was 7% interest rates to buy or things like that, if it actually mirrors the same trend that we're seeing right now? Are we going back into that environment?
One of the things is that, so this job vacancy survey, we're one of, I think, 3 states in the United States that does it, is our shop is one of the only ones. And we only started it in 2013. But there are other series that go back further in time, like the job openings and labor turnover series. But those, what this is 100% based on what employers are directly telling us. And the stuff that comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics is not based really at all on what employers are telling us about their job openings. It's modeled off of different sets of stats that are kind of correlated to this, but not direct from employers' mouths. So those go back a little bit further. But I don't know if they would tell me, or if I would feel confident enough in what it would tell me based on the way that it's done.
And I've been following a few economists that are trying to take the previous kind of recessionary environment and tracking interest rates. And basically what they're saying is by the year 2030, we're gonna have 20 to 30% unemployment based on previous, but it's they're taking these predictive models and taking a different environmental factors, but they're also taking some of the same macroeconomic trends leading us in this. So it's then they're not focusing on manufacturing, they're just focusing more economically. And that's just interesting because, right, as we see some of these balloons, what should we expect? Again, we're trying to say, what are we trying to plan for, how to retrain, reskill? What type of unemployment are we looking forward to, not what are we looking back at?
So I don't, and I know I'm way over my time, so I'm going to stop talking as fast as I can. There is a forecast of unemployment and the unemployment rate. The Office of Economic Analysis does that, and I'll add it to my list along with calculating how much that percent decline is in manufacturing. I don't think they have it going anywhere near 20%, but they do a forecast of it for sure. Yes.
Do you have any sense of how big a role automation is playing in employment declines? I mean, we all know plant closures are probably the bulk of it, but.
So automation is another thing that we do not yet have a good, robust thing to put stats on. But it is one of those things where you could see, and its potential where you're seeing it's hard to find enough workers. I'm seeing it visually, seeing it in agriculture. With equipment that can do picking on things that it won't hurt, like picking something where the fruit can handle it. I'm seeing it in retail trade, and things like grocery stores and switches and self-checkouts, which I'm terrible at, and stuff like that. And then in some of the other, like leisure hospitality and places where people are still using the QR code because you can't find enough people to,
You're not changing bed sheets anymore in hotels, right?
Yeah, that's actually, I would, instead of a automation technology change, that's, I think, just a change in the way business is run. People have come to expect something different or come to accept something that's a different level than what they had before. And I don't think you'll see daily room service. Again, yeah.
The vacancies, do you have projections, particularly as we're thinking about an aging workforce in manufacturing? What you're anticipating around job vacancies, sort of projecting ahead?
So it's a little bit different than this. This is just what people are actively recruiting for right now in the private sector in Oregon. We do have one of my colleagues, and I did this for 7 years, and Sarah's taken it over wonderfully. She does our occupational projections where we look at 10-year forecast of what the net change will be. We expect there to be 265,000 more jobs in Oregon in 2031 than there were in 2021. And then that's just the net change from businesses that are either newly opening or expanding in Oregon. And then on top of that, there's how many people are going to retire, leave the labor force. They're going to not be, working in retail anymore. They're going to take a job, one of these really awesome mechatronics jobs we talked about earlier, is making a major occupational change from one area to another. And over the course of the 10-year period, that adds up to like 2.5 million job openings in Oregon. Sorry.
No, that was wonderful. So I'm going to transition us with Jennifer to the kind of final part of our time together, which is talking about how we're going to advance our short-term objectives, which is advising on future rounds of workforce ready grant funding. We wanted to do this data refresher just because it's really good context for how you advise on an investment and thinking about the criteria you might do that. But before I go through some of that consensus seeking framework, I wanted to have Jennifer walk through what are the workforce ready grant funding? What are they? What can we advise? So Jennifer, take it away.
Thank you. And I appreciate Sarah's comment about taking notes around sort of the presentations today were designed to spark your thinking about what else do I want to know? What else do I need to know? And some of that will be data, some of that will be through examples and things that we're sharing. I'm gonna just take a few minutes to walk you through. We talked earlier about the industry consortia itself. You can go to the next slide. The industry consortia itself, sort of what your role and responsibility is in the broader ecosystem, and also the piece of the Future Ready Oregon legislation that informs the industry consortia. Now we're going to look at the piece of the statute that talks about the workforce ready grant funding in particular. So you can go to the next slide. We talked a little bit about timelines. I'll give you a little more detail here about your short-term objectives. Our kickoff meeting was in August. Today is our first quarterly meeting. We expect that we'll meet again in January and probably March. So it'll be a bit of a compressed quarterly schedule as we move to get to that first set of funding recommendations. You can go to the next slide, please. Excellent. So a little bit about the Future Ready Oregon funding broadly for those of you who are less familiar with this. Future Ready Oregon was a $200 million investment that combined both general fund and federal ARPA funding. The general fund investments were obligated and spent in the end of the 21-23 biennium. So all of that funding through a number of mechanisms, including workforce ready grants, have already been obligated, and we've been closing those out at the end of June 2023. We're shifting into the ARPA funded investments. You can see here, there's $85 million in workforce ready grant funding in ARPA funds. We have approximately 40 million in workforce ready grant funding left for the industry consortia, each of the 3 industry consortia, to inform future rounds of workforce ready grant funding opportunities. So all of the Workforce Ready grant funding, some of which you've heard about here today, to date has been competitively awarded across healthcare, manufacturing, and technology. The next rounds of funding will be sector specific, and you all will inform what the priorities are for that manufacturing investment. You can go to the next slide, please. So a little bit more about Future Ready Oregon, just to again sort of ground ourselves in the statute. Here are the priority populations that are identified in the Future Ready Oregon Senate Bill 1545, and all Future Ready Oregon investments are designed to advance opportunities for these underserved and underrepresented populations. Really thinking about adult learners, dislocated workers, disconnected youth, and individuals who have been historically underserved and underrepresented, particularly in the three industry sectors that have been prioritized in the legislation. Next slide, please. So for Workforce Ready grant funding, these are intended to advance innovation and partnerships in the workforce ecosystem, and the Workforce Ready grants in particular are also designed to expand the partners that comprise our workforce system. And so in terms of eligibility for funding, it is limited to workforce service providers and community-based organizations that administer workforce programs in healthcare, manufacturing, and technology, and prioritize equitable program participation for individuals from the priority populations identified in the bill. And in terms of eligible activities, the funding can be used, I think about it in three buckets. The funding can be used to expand organizational capacity to provide those workforce services. So in some cases, that might be an organization that provides workforce services and wants to expand into one of these three sectors. Could be an organization that provides services for their specific community, and they want to add workforce services to the portfolio of supports that they're providing. It can really be a wide variety. The second bucket of investments is to expand education and training programs. So that might be to develop new curriculum or to purchase equipment or technology to expand an existing program or to launch a new program, again, in healthcare, manufacturing, or technology. And then the third bucket is really that direct to individual support. So funding can be used to offset the costs of education and training. That could be tuition and fee assistance, but it can also be used flexibly to support individuals with wraparound supports and services, offsetting the costs of transportation or technology or job readiness supplies. And it really is, it's the combination of these three that centers the needs of individuals and really allows workforce service providers, education and training providers, and community organizations to build programs around the needs of individuals and communities. Next slide, please. So these are in your slide deck, but I thought it's also important to talk a little bit about definitions because there are some words in the legislation that it's important for us to understand. When it refers to workforce development and workforce programs, these are some of the activities that are included in those definitions. So workforce development includes education and training services, apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs. It can include labor market analysis and research if that's a priority for this group. Employment and reemployment services. We heard a little bit about that today, as well as recruitment and retention strategies. Those are also considered eligible activities. Next slide, please. I mentioned that the organizations that are eligible for funding are community-based organizations and workforce service providers. I also mentioned that at the heart of these investments is advancing innovation and partnerships. So while a community-based organization or a workforce service provider is the eligible applicant, the intention is that proposals would demonstrate strong partnerships that really advance that shared leadership model we've been talking about and modeling here, where you're combining industry-informed, industry-led and employer partnerships with community-based organizations that have trusted relationships with community who are supporting individual participants and helping to inform systems change based on the needs of community. And then education and training partners and providers who are responding to the needs of both and really developing and delivering on that industry-informed, culturally responsive education and training program. So in terms of the eligible applicant in those cases, community-based organizations includes culturally specific organizations and nonprofit organizations that are representative of a particular community. And then culturally specific organizations are organizations that serve a particular cultural community that are primarily staffed by and led by members of that community that really understand the lived experience and the cultural strengths and practices of that community. And then workforce service providers are nonprofit and public workforce education, training, and career services providers. And in some cases, there are governments, city and county governments that have been designated as workforce service providers. Also, our tribal government partners would fall into that category as well. All right, next slide, please. Okay, and so then this is the criteria that's established in the statute for how we evaluate workforce ready grants. So when you think about the criteria that you all might develop or the priorities that you all might develop for a manufacturing specific grant opportunity, these are foundational. These must be the beginning point. And then better understanding the sector specific needs, whether that is driven by occupation or a particular pathway. That's the kind of criteria that you all will be evaluating. But the primary criteria includes, again, the partnerships, engaging with employers, partners demonstrated experience serving individuals from priority populations, intentions to collaborate with partners across the education and training continuum. And many of these partners are the same partners that are identified as part of the industry consortium model. So thinking about career connected learning and seamless education, where we're engaging with our K-12 partners, community colleges, other education and training partners, universities, industry associations, and economic development organizations, and culturally specific community partners. Again, sort of the that shared leadership approach, and that's one of the criteria for workforce ready grant funding. Demonstrated organizational and technical capacity. Again, this could be on behalf of the applicant or a partner within the application. What are the roles and responsibilities of the partners that are applying for funding? Technical expertise may come from one of the partners, not necessarily the applicant organization themselves. And then prioritizing opportunities to leverage other funding sources. Thinking about opportunities to come alongside other state, federal, or philanthropic or private sector investments in education and training, and how we might leverage these investments beyond their own capacity. Last slide for me is just, again, coming back to the timeline. So we anticipate that By March, this group will be providing recommendations for that manufacturing specific funding opportunity. All of the ARPA funding has to be obligated and under contract by the end of 2024. So we'll be moving into requests for applications quite quickly in the late spring, so that we can be announcing awards late summer and moving into contracting so that the funding is fully obligated by the end of 2024. Programs have until 2026 to fully implement their work. That was a lot of information. Do you have any questions? All right, all of the definitions, criteria, they are in your slide packet. This is not the last time you'll hear this, but making sure that we have sort of that shared foundation around what we're building on. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, so I promise just like 4 minutes of talking, and then you all can get in small groups to unpack a lot of the information that you heard today and start to elevate some ideas, some priorities, just some discussion that will feed into your working groups that will convene between now and your next consortium meeting. But before I do that, I just wanted to share some just guiding principles for consensus process and collaborative decision-making. So you all will need to agree on how you want to make decisions as a group. Once you start to elevate recommendations and priorities, how are you going to come to consensus on a set of recommendations for the first or the next round of Future Ready Oregon Workforce Ready Grant funding, and then of course into your medium-term objectives as you start to elevate policy and funding recommendations beyond Future Ready Oregon investments, how you want to make decisions. So our partners at Oregon Consensus has a process that's going to help guide this, but I wanted to share just some general ideas on how you approach consensus decisions. So next slide. So really how I like to think about consensus is derived from the term consent. So you have the information and you feel like you're in your agency when you're making the decision. And so I really use kind of 5 guiding principles around seeking consensus. The first is alignment. The second is time. The third is extending trust. The fourth is principled stance. And the fifth is shared learning. So I'm going to go through each of these briefly before we get into our small groups. The next slide, please. So the first is alignment. And I want to tie this back to Rudy Ann's presentation. Are we the right people in the room to make the decision? So we, have a 45 person membership team or a 45 person consortium and a 4-person executive leadership team. But I imagine that along the way, we might not have all of the right people in the room to make the decision. And so really building in additional process to seek that engagement as you are working through your decisions. The second bullet under alignment is just how we can engage additional perspectives and voices. This gets also into some of the equity talk around statewide strategies versus targeted strategies. So that targeted universalism. So as you're coming up with recommendations for the state, thinking about diverse perspectives in those recommendations and engaging those diverse voices as you're elevating that. So time, this is my favorite one as a facilitator. What is the scope of what we're trying to get done and how much time do we have to make that decision? So Jennifer shared the timeline for the next round of Future Ready Oregon funding is having a decision and final recommendations by March 2024. That is our timeline. So how do we build a process working back from that can give us enough time to make that decision? So what are the boundaries of that decision and what are the types that, how deep do we want to get into that, into those recommendations? And do we have enough time to do that? Do we not have enough time to engage additional perspectives? So that's another principle of consensus that I like to bring into the room. And this is really important. So you're going to be generating lots of ideas as you're moving through this process. And so making sure to not limit your ideas to just this funding, but making sure your parking lot have a good parking lot of ideas and that there is a plan to work on them at a different time or in a parallel process. So I imagine you're going to be elevating potential policy barriers that are in play. And that doesn't mean you ignore those policy barriers. It just means, hey, we can't solve this with funding, but we might want to solve this later on in our process. So making sure you're building that into your working groups and into your process. Next slide. Extending trust. Okay, I think all of these are my favorite, but like, wait, this one. So extending trust. I like to say like, trust people and they will become trustworthy. And so building group agreements that allow people to show up in their expertise and lived experience. So you are able to potentially bring multiple hats and experiences into the room and allowing for that. And that relationships are the foundation of consensus. And so when you are really in true relationship with the people you're making decisions with, I've experienced better consensus processes. Principled stance, creating space for disagreement. You really can't agree unless you've meaningfully disagreed. And so what we don't want to do is come into a space where we're not able to share that we might disagree with something. And that is kind of festering under the surface and not getting addressed. And so I like to call this generative conflict. So when you are in principled stance or you are disagreeing, that you're generating new solutions. So you're generating something from that conflict. But you're not damping it down. You want to create space for that. You want to create space for disagreement. And assess the context of the decision-making space, using conflict, as I said, to generate new ideas and solutions, and allowing a diversity of perspectives. So don't necessarily think that everyone's going to conform and that's what consensus is, but actually consensus is really allowing that generation of solutions and generating new ideas and multiple perspectives in the room. And then I love this iterative strategy development over static strategic planning. I think just a month ago, I heard Gail's presentation in the same space and things have already changed. And so I imagine that this is going to be a very active and adaptive process that you are all engaging with. So kind of allowing for that iterative strategy development rather than creating one static strategic plan. And then the final principle is shared learning. And I think this can cut across a lot of the different principles, but making sure everyone has the same level of access to information. So really when we are consenting to something, I know I've experienced processes where I'm asked to say, yes, I want to prioritize that, but I actually don't have all the information that I available to make that decision. So I leave the room and I'm like, oh, that didn't feel good. I'm supposed to agree to something, but I actually have no idea what I agreed to. So making sure that people have the same access to information. Removing barriers to engagement as you're thinking about engaging diverse perspectives, potentially removing barriers through survey, through different technology opportunities so that people can engage in your process along the way. And I think Rudy Ann may have mentioned this in her talk, but just slowing down just enough so that everyone has that access. So not moving forward too quickly so that, you know, when people are, as I said, consenting or seeking consensus, that they're really in their agency and they know what they're agreeing to or disagreeing to. So Turner, when he is back facilitating your process, has an idea of, you know, when you are moving into the space of elevating recommendations, Oregon Consensus has a really meaningful process to take you through that and actually getting to a decision and some ideas for how you do that. But I did just want to share briefly that here are some guiding principles you can think about as you're moving into your working groups and you're starting to coalesce around recommendations so that, you know, you're really making space for disagreement. You're not starting from, you don't want to be afraid to disagree. You really want to start to build those relationships so that when you do get down to the hard decisions, that you're really able to show up as your full selves and your expertise and why we invited you into this space. I think I took longer than 4 minutes. My apologies.
You did great.
But I do, any questions before I send you to the rest of your day, which is in a working group before we come back and wrap up? Wonderful. These are not in your folders, but they will be posted online. We had a kind of last minute change. So I'm going to have everyone kind of gather in groups of 3 or 4 and really spend, gosh, a half an hour unpacking the day and unpacking both the equity lens, the presentations, you have them all in your packet, thinking about the short-term decision that we have, how you think this group is going to start to see consensus on that decision, missing information in the data, really have a dialogue in groups of 3 or 4 around that. And then we'll come back as a full group before I'll share what next steps we have and what you plan to expect. Sorry, I don't have enough caffeine today before we reconvene in January. So just huddle in groups of 3 or 4. I don't think we need to count off. I think you're all friends. And then I will reconvene you in 30 minutes. So I'd love if one person from each group could just share kind of one key idea, theme, discussion point that you wanted to elevate into this space.
That's one.
So do I have anyone that wants to go first? Or I'm just gonna go around.
We can go first. Okay, so one thing that we talked about is it'd be really a great conversation to ask what employers are looking for and what skills and workforce readiness preparation they're seeing is a need that needs to be met. I mean, just even like simple things like, attendance, coming to work every day and on time and things like that and different, behavioral skills. And so we think that would be really interesting because then that would help shape the programs and what we provide the funding for it in terms of getting the job readiness out there.
Wonderful. So employer engagement is a kind of really key theme. That's awesome. Other folks want to elevate one area of discussion, idea, right?
We talked about a couple, but one was that we want to look at solving a large problem, a systemic problem and understanding, and then we do have some missing data and some things that we think we want to talk about, but it's an opportunity to look at a way instead of having a bunch of pilots or a bunch of things, having something that can really solve a long-term systemic problem. And the other piece of it is having some requirement for dissemination. There's a lot of times that really good things can happen and a group gets grant funding and then nothing ever happens with it. Like they might sustain their program and find other ways to fund it, but a way to make sure that part of the requirement is that they have to go out and teach others how to do what they did. And so that's something that we talked about.
Great. And you said that we have some missing information. If we don't have, if you have identified like inputs into this process or missing information, it would be great that we could either elevate that on a piece of paper if we don't have time in this space so that we can capture it. Because I know it's been helpful for the healthcare process to feed the working groups with that information. So if you have it written down or something,
Do you want us to do it now or do you want us to
write it down and then, but I am curious, like high level, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe both.
Definitely migration patterns, like for some of the pieces that we've heard that there's some counties that aren't at full reemployment, but is their population still the same as well? Employment projections, where is it going in the next 5 to 10 years? So that we're making sure we're not investing in programs where it's not growing. And we've talked about long-term sustainability, like the ability for us to look at some of these programs. So if there are examples or other programs or things that have been able to kind of grow and is there examples of that? And land use is something that came up as probably a policy barrier as well. If we're looking at expanding and you're trying to expand for an area where you cannot continue to grow or build, then that's going to be a challenge as well.
Wonderful. Other groups want to share? Yeah.
We talked a little bit about like in the broader context is kind of defining advanced manufacturing, whether through the scope of we have different representation, food or timber, semiconductor, kind of what is, if we're going to kind of narrow in a little bit. And then I think the sustainability funding, as far as I think the criteria, if there is a thing of previously funded programs, because I'll just like I didn't get second round funding, so now I have to like cut the positions that were doing the things and like so I think just building on that I don't know, momentum of like, you got this far and then now you can get funded again as long as you're like meeting your projected outcomes or whatever.
Great, thank you.
And.
All right, I think we got a little highly specific, but a couple ones. I wanted
It's
to-
okay.
But appreciate the long-term systemic problem piece, because I think several things we talked about were about not having sort of a standardization across different kinds of curriculum or ideas or things that go together. And so I just put two on the table that we talked about. One was related to marketing the jobs. Like we have a challenge about, of course, about essentially selling jobs in particularly the manufacturing sector, that they're a job you want to do, that they're not old, dirty jobs in factories and coal mines, if you will. But in addition to that, the value proposition of taking that job over, if you're having a battle between $2 to $5 of hourly wage between working in fast food or retail versus coming to work in the manufacturing sector, that does not account for the 401k and the health benefit, right? And so working with our educational partners to make sure that is part of the teaching that you're getting before you come and work in one of our programs. So you understand you're getting not just a career track, but also more money on day one, right? That's going to last you throughout the rest of your time. And sort of related to that, we had a bit of a conversation from the end about the connection of high school CTE programs with the next step. Like there's almost no job in our industry that you can walk out of high school and go into. You need some sort of certificate usually. So what is the sort of standardized effort to get an immediate next step, whether it's to a community college or some other training program that gets you quickly from that high school diploma into a job?
Those transition moments are really important.
So we talked about we had such a great conversation. But so many of our ideas boil down to like, we need to be collaborative because there's this intersecting point of need between industry and education and community-based organizations. And we discussed like learning styles, like not everybody learns the traditional way, but if we could work with manufacturers to identify the learning styles that are more useful for the manufacturing industry, we could build assessments and work with them to find things that people are good at. And then once students are good at something, they want to do it, right? So building those pathways, but I know that's not exactly answering the question we're supposed to. So I think the crux of all the good ideas that we talked about, and there's so many more, is that we need to keep bringing. So I would say there'd be an emphasis on the collaboration piece between the different manufacturing, education, and community-based organizations, because just this one conversation we had really needs to be extended. So that's what, I don't know, you guys agree with that?
So I think that'll happen in your working groups and then at the full consortia, but I'm hearing just continuing that cross-sector conversation and partnership is critical. Other thoughts for here? I don't know. I didn't know how the groups were. I don't know if you both have more to share, but I know you guys haven't had a chance to share.
We had a really great conversation. A lot of the points that we touched upon have kind of been shared, but I think at the forefront of our conversation was we touched upon generational shifts and changes that are happening in terms of our workforce and how we have to kind of accommodate and learn what is being sought by employees. And also the collaboration piece, I think, really stood out in terms of letting employers know and employers letting industry and other educational partners know what skills to really start developing in the students was really key in kind of the pieces. So I definitely think the collaboration piece really stood out in our conversations as well. It's great.
Yeah, so you just made me think of something. I'm wondering if maybe for our next meeting, we could all get kind of a color dot on our name tag, depending on which section we're representing. Because like for us, we each represent a different area. So when we all came together, right, the four of us, the kind of executive, like we've had a topic that we were all hearing from different perspectives. But like the tendency is gonna be to like go with people you already know. So we don't need education groups all talking to education groups. Right? So we put that might help us. I don't know, right? I mean, if you just let people introduce themselves, I'm like, is that a company? Is that a I don't know, or so it might help, just so we know.
I love that suggestion. Yeah, thank you. I know Jennifer's at a conference where there were colored dots of like, if you wanted to hug or not. Yeah, but maybe we can have two colors. You want to? I like hugs, so. Other thoughts? Anything you want to elevate into this space before we wrap up?
Something that we had talked about back here, the non-consortia-ish, welcome to our group, hello. And it aligns with both what you all said over there about the CTP programs and then what Christy said, and it's making me think, there's a piece of this about sustaining the things that have been brewing up and worked on over years and years and years. But then also thinking forward in the land of economic development of what are we anticipating happening? What are the things that are coming down the line that we're going to need workforce? That could be youth, it could be incumbent workers, whatever. And how do we get that and uplift that? So I think the things that you all said are things we talked about, but just from a really interesting economic development perspective.
Yeah, it's great.
Thanks.
You can speak on that.
This group's awesome. I didn't have to give you a question from, and you came up with some pretty great ideas. I'm just gonna share a little bit about next steps. So this is the first quarterly meeting of this consortia, and the next quarterly meeting will be in January. To be determined the date, but January 2024, hardly believe it's almost November. So between now and that consortia meeting, your working groups will convene online. So Carrie, our new consortia, manufacturing consortium lead, will be convening those working groups and starting to refine in particular some of the priorities and recommendations that you might want to advance for the short-term objective, Future Ready Oregon, Workforce Ready grant funding. But those conversations are likely going to start a little bigger as you start to then narrow in over the coming months, and March then will be where you'll be elevating those recommendations for Workforce Ready grant funding. So your next consortium meeting will be in January, and the working groups will do a report out at that time. And that is, I think, unless I missed the next step, but I think the one thing is if you do, if in any of your little small group discussions, identified additional information that you think would be useful for this process, please. I think Carrie's email was on there at some point, but I think she would be a great person to send that to as inputs to your process. So additional data, additional analysis, just additional information that you need to start to coalesce around some of these recommendations. So I think that two people are going to lead some tours. So just appreciate the time, energy that you took the whole 10 to 3 today in this space, and just really appreciated it. And we will adjourn 9 minutes early so you can go off and tour these wonderful spaces.
Greg, if it's okay, if we meet in the lobby at 3, so if folks have personal needs.
That would be really nice.
And I feel like I need to clarify the National Academies conference had colored dots based on whether you needed a fist bump or you were open to handshakes or hugs or staying out in my personal bubble. It wasn't about like whether I was open to hugs personally. So, thank you all for your time today. Stay here and follow up.